Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our meeting, the Executive Committee General Obligation Bond Committee meeting, October 17th, and I want to officially call this meeting to order. Let me first introduce our Spanish interpretation. Would you please introduce yourselves?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. My name is Elsie Duarte, and along with my colleague Carmen Cota, we will be servicing as interpreters in today's meeting. I will now introduce myself to our Spanish-speaking audience and review some guidelines. Buenos días, mi nombre es Elsie Duarte y junto con mi colega Carmen Cota estaremos sirviéndoles como intérpretes en la reunión de hoy. Al momento de hacer un comentario público, de favor les pedimos que hable despacio, con claridad y deténgase después de cada pocas oraciones para interpretarle de la manera más completa posible. Gracias. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And thank you very much as well. There will be a public comment period during item 4 on today's agenda. I'm planning to reserve at least 30 minutes for public comment, but I will decide the duration and time limit for each speaker based on the available time and the number of individuals registered to speak. If you're attending in person and would like to speak, you will need to sign up at the kiosk located at the entrance to the council chamber before item 4 begins. If you're attending virtually and would like to speak at a future Go Bond Committee meeting, please note that you need to register 2 hours prior to the start of the meeting. And with that, let's start with our meeting agenda. The first item is for the approval of minutes of the Go Bond kickoff meeting on August 8th, 2022. Do I have a motion?
So move.
Thank you. A second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor, please let it be known by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Thank you. Second agenda item is the approval of the minutes of the Go Bond Committee public hearing on September 14th, 2022. Let me call for a motion.
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Thank you. Any comment? Those in favor, please let it be known by saying aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
So carried. Thank you very much for that. Let me share some introductory remarks as we kick off this important meeting today. Over the last couple of months, Go Bond subcommittees have been reviewing capital needs identified by city staff and hearing from members of the public and partner organizations. Hearing from Phoenix residents on what they would like to see in the next Go Bond program is essential, and it has been a priority of the City Council. There have been 27 committee meetings and 1 dedicated public meeting since we began this process in August. The schedule of meetings and information on how to register to speak at a future Go Bond Committee meeting is available online at Phoenix.gov bond. The website also includes email and phone options for residents to comment, and residents can follow the program on social media. Staff has summarized resident input in the community feedback report, and they have produced this every 2 weeks. I urge committee members to continue to review this report throughout the remainder of our process. Subcommittees have now completed their work, and each has identified a priority list of recommended projects to present to the Executive Committee. The City Council appointed this Executive Committee to provide final recommendations for a $500 million general obligation bond program. As you will remember, the starting point of staff's prioritized needs provided in the capital needs study exceeded $500 million, and subcommittee recommendations have grown from that starting point. It is now our difficult task to identify the most urgent capital needs throughout the city and to recommend a $500 million program to the City Council. With the last bond program having occurred over 15 years ago, the city does have significant deferred maintenance needs, and city leadership considered those needs critical for this bond program. The city's general fund has a limited ability to take on new operating costs. As we listen to subcommittee recommendations, the public, and begin to formulate our own ideas, it is very important that we will be mindful of that constraint. With those opening remarks, I would now like to introduce City Manager Jeff Barton, Chief Financial Officer Kathleen Gitkin, and Budget and Research Director Amber Williamson. May I turn this over to you, Jeff?
Thank you, Chairman Harper. Before we begin staff's brief presentation today, I do want to take a few moments to recognize each and every one of you and your subcommittees that you led for all of the hard work that you went through over the last couple of weeks. It was an extremely arduous task, and for that you are to be applauded. The task before all of us here today is one that I'm extremely excited about. It's been 16 years since the city has had its last bond program, and for a city our size, that is extremely too long. As a city our size, we should routinely have bond programs at a minimum every 5 to 7 years. I think, there are sayings out there that we all learned from the time that we were a child about repeating your past if you don't look back and learn from it. And I think what we can learn is looking at our last several bond programs is the fact that, one, they were too big and they took us too long to get through. So the bond program that we have before you today and what the vision that we have for you is 4 bond programs over the course of 20 years. The first one is the one that is really key to the entire puzzle because it's got to be sized right so that we can fit it within the existing footprint of the existing property tax without having to raise taxes on our residents. It's also designed so that we ensure that, one, we can get through it in a reasonable amount of time and we don't extend it for 15 or 20 years like we have in the past. The other thing is we are in very uncertain times. And as the former budget director and a finance guy myself, I think it would be imprudent for me to raise taxes on my residents right now, especially on households that have become extremely unaffordable. I do not want to be responsible for that. The other thing is just trying to understand and making sure that we as a city don't bite off more than we can chew. Sometimes our appetite is much larger, our eyes are much larger than our appetite, and so we've got to protect ourselves and protect the city. We have a unique opportunity, myself, my staff, and you as the executive committee, to set the future of this city for the next 20 years. And for that, I think that is something that we should all be extremely excited about. And again, I look forward to our continued work with you. I look forward to the work that you have to do over these next couple of weeks. Your job's not easy. I will tell you that every time we've endeavored on a bond program, there has always been more ask than need. The last bond program that we had was about $870+ million. We had $3.2 billion worth of submittals. So again, it's not uncommon, it's not uncalled for that we have to trim to get to our target. The other thing that I would tell you is as we endeavor on this process, there will be a lot of emotion, and a successful bond program is one that takes into account the entirety of our city because we all contribute as property taxpayers. So we need to make sure that we leverage equity across the program. Some of the statements that I've said to you in my opening are going to be consistent throughout the presentation that you hear from us today, but I did want to just take that time to walk you through some of those comments. So as we move forward in today's very brief staff presentation, we're going to cover a couple of different things, one of which is the executive committee objectives. Second, we'll go over the recommended allocation targets that I gave just as a means to help you make things slightly easier. Otherwise, you're going through each subcommittee and trying to come up with your own targets, and that could be even harder. So I tried to just give you a starting point. Fiscal Capacity Committee recommendations, which we'll talk about, and some folks, Ron Butler in particular, was on our Fiscal Capacity Committee, and so he understands kind of your executive committee objectives. So the mayor and city council appointed this committee to recommend to them a $500 million program based on the highest priority needs within the different subcommittees that you had come before you. The 8 subcommittees have met repeatedly over the past 2 months and have recommended a priority list of projects based on their recommendations, based on their input, and based on input from the community that came to those meetings. The executive committee, you as this body, will evaluate these projects, you'll hear public comment, and you'll recommend a $500 million program. There may be, again, I know outside of this body as well as outside of this chamber, there's conversation about having a program exceed the $500 million. Your charge as the executive committee was to deliver council a $500 million program because that's what was recommended by the Fiscal Capacity Committee. Not 525, not 530, it was a $500 million program. If the council chooses to go over that, they would make that recommendation at a later date after you've made your recommendations to them. So again, the recommended targets that I recommended to you in my letter, that is in your packet. Dave, I misspoke earlier. It is in the packet. So those recommendations are not binding. They're just there to help make things slightly easier on you as a committee. And so now I'll go over those. So again, the targets, again, I want to emphasize this over and over. They're not mandatory. You are a body that was appointed by council. You operate independent of anything that I could tell you. I'm just making recommendations. First, they prioritized the list of capital projects in the capital needs study that was submitted to each committee based on staff's work. That was initially budget and research worked with all of our departments to identify a list of projects that were needed. Again, it's been 16 years. We've got 16 years worth of pent-up demand and deferred maintenance. Those initial programs totaled about $1.2 billion. You have the entire list, but the priority list was only about $650. Then I took into account the subcommittee prioritization in terms of what they came up with in terms of their ranking and how they seeded their projects. I then looked at the public comments that were received during the subcommittee process to try to make sure that I included that conversation and those comments to ensure that I was taking into account what public sentiment was. We talk about equity. As a city, we like to talk about equity. We just approved our first DEI position, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I want to make sure that we have equity in everything that we do. And that means making sure that we have equity in our bond program. And that means that every council district needs to have something in this bond program to make it work for everyone. We shouldn't have folks in the north or the south that are paying property taxes and not get anything. We need to make sure that we're equitable across the entire city. And then finally, but city departments. My job as a city manager is to make sure that our departments don't set unrealistic expectations. Over the past 2 years in the budget, I'll give you a prime example of that. We've added over 500 positions the last 2 years in the budget process. Many of those positions continue to sit vacant because we can't fill them. It's the tight job market. But with those positions that we've added, we had expectations of doing great and wonderful things, and we've fallen short because we can't fill those positions. That same thing plays into this bond program. I wanted to scale a bond program that I knew we could get through in 5 years, one that we could at least start those projects in 5 years, one that I knew we wouldn't be drained on in terms of staffing not being able to deliver. The other thing we got to keep in mind, there's a lot of money floating out there from the federal government stimulus projects and the infrastructure bill. So we'll be competing for the same external talent on all of these projects. We'll also be competing for the same materials, steel, concrete. There's only so much slack in the system. And so again, this first bond program needs to take all of that into account. We also need to take that into account as we talk about the individual subcommittee projects as well as the subcommittee targets. And then, also, as the budget director, I have, and many of us that have worked at the city a long time, we have sometimes inherited problems that have taken us decades to get out of, and that in terms of sustainability. As the former budget director and now city manager and having a great financial and budget staff with me, I like to make sure that we make decisions that are in the best interest of the city long term. And if we had a larger bond program, it may be great for everyone, but again, setting unfair and unrealistic expectations, right now we don't have the capacity to operate much beyond the $500 million. There is not a lot of slack in our operating budget, and on top of that, we are starting labor negotiations here in a couple of months. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we've got over 2,600 vacancies. Part of that key to fixing those vacancies and filling those positions is adjusting compensation significantly. And just to put a point on things, 1% in total compensation for the city of Phoenix is about $14 million. And so that's not cheap. And so when we start talking about operating costs, I need to take into account the entirety of everything that we're looking at, not just facility operating costs, but the cost of our staff that operate and man those facilities as well. So in your packet, you also have a letter from me, which I've kind of mentioned earlier, that gives you some targets by subcommittee. Now, again, some of you may look at these targets and see, wow, they're quite a bit different from what my subcommittee came up with, and you'd be correct. Again, we only have $500 million to work with. We're trying to make sure that we get ample coverage across the entirety of the city, as well as throughout the different subcommittees. And so those things that I just walked you through earlier, just the slide before, or how I arrived at these individual targets. And I'm not going to walk through each and every single one, but you have in your package, you have a list of all the recommendations from the subcommittee, so you can see if you were to draw a line where those projects would land. I will tell you, though, that in some of those subcommittees, it looks to me that there isn't coverage across the city. So you may need to do some maneuvering to ensure that we've got ample coverage throughout the entirety of the city within individual projects. Some projects and subcommittees are citywide, so they get coverage everywhere. They just don't say definitively within a particular geographic area or council district. But again, just to refer you to the list, arts and culture, I'm recommending that they receive about 10% of the bond program, which will be about $50 million. Their recommendations as a subcommittee came in at about 64, so that would be about a $14 million adjustment that you'd have to make there. Economic development, I'm recommending about $38 million. And so again, you would see from that list, they came up with about $46 million, so it would be about an $8 million hit there. Environment and sustainability, my target for them was $26 million, and for them, they came in at 25.1, so that number is very close to what we came up with. They'd actually end up with a little bit more if you went with my recommendations. Housing, human services, and homelessness, again, outside of public safety right now with what faces the city, I don't think there's a larger area, especially with homelessness and affordable housing issues that we're facing as a city. I'm recommending that we do $63 million there, and again, their list was way more than that, but at about $102 million. Neighborhoods, I'm recommending that we do $45 million. Their list was about $54 million, so again, a little bit of a reduction that they need to make there. Parks and Recreation, I'm recommending that they get about 13%, so they'd be equal to what we're recommending in percentage-wise to Human Services. They get about $64 million, which would be about a little over a $40+ million cut to them. Public Safety, again, you've heard repeated testimony. If you've been paying attention, you've also seen that our firefighters' response times are going up, and so we do have a need to add a fire station significantly to reduce our response times. But again, I think there's a level of fire station that we can add, as also as a level of fire station that we can operate with our existing footprint of revenues. So again, I'm recommending about $132.5 million, and you can see where that line would be drawn on your project sheet. And then finally, $81 million, 81.5 to be exact, for streets, storm drainage. They brought forward to this body a $124 million recommendation, so it would be about a $40+ million reduction for them as well. I will say, and I have had just a brief conversation with Chairman Martin just a little while ago, they would have taken the biggest cut in terms of everyone, them in public safety, but again, it's about scaling what we can fit into this $500 million program. And then that rounds out my $500 million program. And I'll pass it on now to Kathleen Gitkin, who will walk you through the next portion of our presentation.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, it's been a couple of months since we met, so I just want to briefly remind you of the Fiscal Capacity Committee's recommendation. First of all, the Fiscal Capacity Committee recommended a $500 million bond program for the November 2023 election. And absent any unanticipated legislative or severe economic changes, the Fiscal Capacity Committee recommendation believes that this can be done without increases to our secondary property tax rate, currently at 81 cents. And a bond program of this magnitude is not expected to adversely impact any of our bond ratings. And then finally, the Fiscal Capacity recommended that this approach could strategically position the city for subsequent bond elections in 5-year increments with values of approximately $500 million. So in other words, assuming no major economic changes, this sets the city up to do 4 $500 million programs over the next 20 years. That's $2 billion in capital financing over 20 years without raising the property tax rate. And the Fiscal Capacity Committee recommendations are based on core guiding principles that can all be achieved by keeping the new bond program at $500 million. So first, we want to maintain our high bond ratings because it allows us to issue debt at a lower cost. That means maintaining our annual debt service levels at a reasonable amount. And as Jeff mentioned, we also want to be careful that the new assets are affordable to operate. High operating costs can crowd out our overall general fund capacity, and it limits resources for other priorities, whether those priorities are now or in the future. We also want to be able to deliver the projects to the residents that we promised. The departments have to ensure that labor and materials are available, as well as staffing, resources to execute these projects. Smaller, more frequent bond programs make it easier to achieve this. And then the intent behind building a new GEO bond program has always been to ensure that it's affordable and that it limits the impact to our property taxpayers. That means no increases to the current total property tax rate of $2.11 or our current secondary property tax rate of 81 cents. Finally, the Fiscal Capacity Committee recommendation took into consideration that there are going to be many other things that we can't predict, such as unexpected statutory requirements that could come in future legislations and economic conditions. So we have to be really mindful that there could be additional legislative mandates that affect our property tax revenues. And because we can't predict the economy, nor do we know what's going to happen in the future, we wanted to make sure that there was plenty of cushion to be able to sustain any kind of economic, unexpected negative economic impacts to this program. So the $500 million program does achieve all of these guiding principles. Thank you.
Chairman Harper and Executive Committee, one thing I was remiss in mentioning in my opening, and Kathleen just reminded me of it when she talked about the unexpected negative economic impacts and legislative mandates. One thing that is likely to be taken away from cities and towns in the very near future, it almost left last session, and it's up for debate now, depending upon who ends up as governor or what have you, is the residential rental tax. And the residential rental tax to the city of Phoenix right now is about $46 million of operating revenue to the general fund and about $88 million all funds. Those other funds would be our 3 dedicated sales tax that support public safety, our 3PI fund, which supports our parks, and then the T2050 fund that supports our transit and our streets department. So that's an example of another reason as to why we're trying to keep operating expenses limited on this first bond program.
All right, thank you, Jeff and Kathleen. So committee, for terms of a schedule of events for today, we will be hearing from subcommittees in regards to the prioritized list of projects that they're recommending for consideration. We're going to do 4 subcommittee presentations today. Next Monday on the 24th, we'll be doing the remaining 4. Today's subcommittees include streets and storm drainage, neighborhoods and city services, housing, human services and homelessness, and public safety. We have allotted 10 minutes roughly for each presentation, followed by a 10-minute question and answer period. We do want to try to stay on schedule. Today's meeting is scheduled to conclude at 12 o'clock. We want to make sure we have enough time at the end of the presentations for public comment. Then your remaining meetings, once you hear all subcommittee presentations, will be dedicated for discussion, deliberation, and then ultimately making committee action on the $500 million bond program that you'll recommend to the City Council. We want to emphasize that public comment will take place at every meeting. Residents can go to Phoenix.gov/bond to register to speak, or they can come to the chambers and speak in person. City Council consideration of the General Obligation Bond Committee's recommendations is tentatively scheduled right now to take place in mid-December. So that concludes our presentation. Unless there are any questions for Jeff, Kathleen, or I, we can move to our first subcommittee presentation. We'll have opening remarks by the chair, Dave Martin, and then staff will walk through the list of prioritized projects.
Well, thank you all very much, particularly City Manager Barton and Chief Financial Officer Gitkin and Research and Budget Director Williamson. I wanted to take a moment and say on behalf of the Executive Committee, we think that you have done a great job in preparation, but I wanted to also recognize the staff who has worked so hard to provide this information, to be so thoughtful about the approach, and then your reminders today about how we have gotten to today. So thank you, each of you, very much. Before we move on, let me ask if any of the executive committee have any questions regarding the last three presentations. Well, if not, then we're very excited about being at this point in this process, and we're going to hear reports from 4 of the 8 subcommittees. The remaining 4 will present recommendations on our October 24th meeting. As Director Williamson said, in order to stay on schedule, we're asking each subcommittee presentation to spend 10 minutes in length with an additional 10 minutes allocated to the Q&A. The intent of today's meeting is to hear each subcommittee's priority list of projects and to ensure there is time for public comment. Committee deliberation and discussion will take place at a future meeting, not here on the floor today. And then, as a reminder, once the 4 committees have concluded, we will move to the public comment section of today's agenda. And so with that, we are all looking forward to Chair David Martin for the Streets and Storm Drainage Subcommittee to begin their report. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Thank you very much for the opportunity to serve. We're extraordinarily grateful for the amount of time staff has put into this, and we worked really, really hard to get to this point. For the record, my name is David Martin. I am the subcommittee chair of the Streets and Storm Drainage Subcommittee. I also serve as the president of the Arizona Chapter Associated General Contractors. Starting off, the first thing that I know our subcommittee member would like to do is thank the public for their participation in our committee. We'd also like to thank the City Council for appointing us to the positions that we have. We're grateful for rolling up our sleeves and getting the work done. And I would like to personally thank our subcommittee members for the work that they put in to get to this point. But probably most importantly, thanking the staff for all the hard work they've put in to getting us to the 22.7% reduction, which is a little less than what the city manager is recommending. But what I'd like to do is sort of frame the process that we went through, Madam Chair, to get to where we are today. Our subcommittee really took on the spirit of recognizing that cuts had to be made. They acknowledged it, and they worked toward reaching that goal. And you'll see in the 2 slides that I'm going to go over how we got there. So why don't we go ahead and go to the first slide. This was the initial prioritization from city staff that came to us, where we had to acknowledge that we were pretty much over the amount that was recommended initially of the 600, I think, some odd million. We knew we had to do our part. If you go to the next slide, and you'll see that our goal was to bring that number down from 160 to 124 million. That was our goal. So we rolled up our sleeves. We said, okay, let's get this done. One of the things that I thought was fantastic that staff did was we did a poll of our committee. The committee then prioritized what they thought was extremely important to them, and this is where the prioritization landed. You can see that Vision Zero was the highest priority. I think that the committee really emphasized the fact that we want to have our streets to be safe. So that was the priority. Going all the way down to number 7, the neighborhood traffic mitigation, we cut and we put some of that money back into Vision Zero. Next. But as you can see, we reached our goal. Who's running this? 22.7%. Isn't that going to come up here? So we reached our goal of the 22.7% in reductions. But we also understand that this is going to be a dynamic process. We acknowledge that. We acknowledge that there are going to be some gives and takes as we move throughout the process. So I would like to, Madam Chair, with your permission, turn it over to staff to get to go over some of the specific projects that we are recommending.
Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee, thank you this morning for your time here to hear this presentation. My name is Mario Paniagua. I'm a Deputy City Manager here at the City of Phoenix, and with me is Street Transportation Director Keeney Knudsen, and to Keeney's left is Eric Froberg, the City Engineer. And so I'm actually going to turn it over to Keeney and Eric to go into, to give you an overview of each of the major program areas that are contained here in the recommendation, starting with Division 0.
Thank you, Mario. Madam Chair, members of the Executive Subcommittee or Executive Committee, wanted to first talk about the go through each of the 6 programs that made it into the prioritization for our Street and Storm Drain Subcommittee. The first one is Vision Zero implementation. Just to let the committee know, back in September, our council unanimously supported the implementation of a Vision Zero Road Safety Action Plan attached with $10 million of a combination of different funding annually to be able to implement. This funding here that's currently in here, $26 million, would be used to be able to supplement the funding that's already been identified. We have a serious issue with roadway injury, serious injuries and fatalities on our roads, and the council has been very supportive. Our public has been very vocal about reversing that trend and making our streets safer, with the goal of getting to 0 serious injuries and fatalities on our roadways by 2050. And we have also partners with the federal government, with the IIJA. There are significant opportunities to be able to leverage these local funds with federal funds to be able to do more. And so these funds would be going directly to address areas around our city's intersections, roadway corridors that have higher incidences of serious injuries, fatalities. These funds would go directly towards saving lives. That's why it was a #1 priority for the subcommittee. That's the first one. The second one is the Equity-Based Transportation Mobility Program. The $20 million here is identified to be able to supplement existing funding that we have identified through the Transportation 2050 program that we have allocated to do this. What we found is there is a significant need to be able to connect neighborhoods to our major transportation corridors. We have a historic disinvestment in some of our communities where we don't have sidewalks, we don't have street lighting, we don't have landscaping to be able to provide safe accommodations for travel for people to get to those transportation corridors. What we found is the Transportation 2050 funding that was allocated through that is not sufficient for the needs that have been identified. That's why this $20 million would help supplement the funding there as well. And you see some of the improvements that this type of funding would be used to be able to make our the commute and the traveling for our public more comfortable and safe. The next one here I wanted to talk about, we have 2 flood-related projects, and there isn't a traditional funding stream in the city to be able to handle these flood mitigation projects, but we partner closely with the Flood Control District of Maricopa County in doing these projects. This first one is a Levine Flood Mitigation Project. This is a collection of 4 projects. I will note the major difference between when we started out with the recommendations and now is the fact that we worked with the Flood Control District, and they have moved from a 50-50 match to a 65-35% match, so it actually required less participation from the city to implement these projects. So this is using funding from GeoBond program to leverage 65% of the project cost for these programs, and this is to be able to address storm drain flooding issues in the Levine area. The next one here is a pavement maintenance supplement. You might be familiar with the $200 million 5-year accelerated pavement maintenance program that we're in the process of finishing up. That program that the council authorized using Transportation 2050 funds was focused in on our major streets and arterials. However, it did not focus in on our residential streets. This pavement maintenance supplement of $35 million would be focused in on neighborhood street mill and overlay programs, which may comprise about 4,000 miles of our 5,000 miles of city streets. And so this would be able to accomplish, again, in addition to our current program, an additional quarter section or a neighborhood. One neighborhood equals $1 million. So this would do 7 neighborhoods per year for a total of 35 neighborhoods over the course of the 5-year program. The next one is the second storm project, and this is for the Hohokam drainage area. This is a collection of 8 projects here. This has GeoBond funding, also would be taking advantage of that 65-35 match with the Flood Control District of Maricopa County, and so this would be able to take care of flood issues in there as well. So this $19 million does become a lot more once you add in the Flood Control District of Maricopa County funding. And you can see the impacted areas as well for the Hohokam. And this is based on an area drainage master plan that was conducted by the county as well. And then finally, we have the storm drain replacement program. This program is addressing, you might hear in the news, different sinkholes that develop around the city during flooding events or storm events. What we found is that there is a number of these storm drain systems that are deteriorated, that were installed in the mid-80s to the early 90s, and they're a corrugated metal piping. And then over time, over the last 30 years, they have succumb to weathering and fatigue, and this would be looking at ways to be able to repair and replace these to be able to avoid that impact to our traveling public, not just vehicles, but pedestrians, bicyclists, and also the utilities, because this does have a major impact on the underground utilities as well whenever these sinkholes do develop. So this would be focused in on doing a citywide assessment of the storm drain needs, and then also then looking from that assessment on doing actual implementation projects to be able to take care of these proactively rather than deal with them reactively as we do now. And with that takes us through the 6 programs that we have prioritized. I'd be happy to answer any questions that the committee may have. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you very much. This question is actually probably for David, and maybe all of the committees we can answer on behalf of all. But the initial number that the team came up with was an expenditure amount of $161 million, dropped to the goal of $124 million, which was what was presented. I'm having trouble reconciling where that goal came from compared to what City Manager Barton has recommended. Was your goal after this process occurred?
Chairman Harper, members of the subcommittee, almost said mayor, members of the subcommittee, committee member Keeley, the initial goals that David talked about, and you'll hear other subcommittees talk about, was in the interim of trying to weed projects down to a prioritized list. What we said to them as a first step as a subcommittee was, we gave you 650. That's over and above the 500 million that we're shooting for. One way to kind of start your weeding out process is what percentage of the 650 were you, and apply that percentage to your 500 million to kind of get you at least a good starting point. So that's where the 22.7 initially came from. I came in after all the subcommittees kind of wrapped up, or we're getting close to wrapping up, and saying, okay, we're still north of 500 million, and wanted to give you all at least some direction and guidance to make your process somewhat easier. Again, not saying that my numbers are etched in stone, but in the absence of me giving you something, you would have to then individually go through and figure out, okay, what's the target for this group, what's the target for this group, and I wanted to try to minimize that as best I could. Hopefully that answers the question.
Chair, I noticed. Thank you. That was a question I had too. I noticed that as your committee shrunk things, you both cut one category, but you also scaled down the dollar amount of a number of those projects. Are any of the projects on your list not further scalable as we try to get maybe toward the city manager's target? Because most of them look like broad programs, but some of them have specific projects associated with them. So I wanted to understand if any of those are, if you cut them, they're just not happening at all versus scaling down.
Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee, committee member Neymark, yeah, we spent quite a bit of time talking about the scalability of each of these program areas. And for the most part, these are pretty scalable, except for the flood mitigation projects. The Levine flood mitigation and the Hohokam drainage program can be scaled down, but because there are specific projects identified within those programs, they would be in large chunks because those projects have specific cost amounts. The Vision Zero could be scaled down. The equity-based transportation, pavement maintenance, and the storm drain program can all be scaled down, and I would look at Eric and Keeney to see if there's anything else you would add to that. Okay.
And then one other, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I would just add to Mario's point, the flood control projects, those two specific, Levine and Hohokam, because you're getting 65% from the flood control district, to me, those should be funded, because that's one way in which our dollar gets, it's a multiplier, right?
Just anticipated what my next question was, so thank you. I just wanted to understand how much the county was putting in, so that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions?
Madam Chair, I just would like to make a point here that's really important for the public to understand. We took our task on cutting extraordinarily seriously, and we recommended approximately 23% reduction. We were under the impression, Madam Chair, that the staff had done a rigorous job of coming up with that initial number of 6 something. And then to have another 33% cut for a total of approximately 50% is a little bit of disparity for us as it relates to making a sacrifice among our subcommittee. So I just want the record to reflect that to go from 160 to 124 to 81.5 is a really tough pill for my subcommittee members to swallow.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? If not, I would like to
I apologize, Madam Chair, but I can no longer hear.
Is that Jennifer?
We're now going to have the Neighborhood and City Service Subcommittee Chairman and City Staff.
My name is Abraham James. I am the subcommittee chair for the Neighborhood and City Services Subcommittee. First, I would like to thank you. I would like to give a lot of credit to the members of our subcommittee. I think that we've worked very well together, and we were able to come up with identify some areas in which we all could agree on, which are libraries, city facilities, historic preservation, city services, and downtown city properties. And we were all very willing and able to work with one another as far as just organizing, categorizing everything, and coming up with various funding beliefs that we could all use going forward. So I will pass this on to Karen Peterson, who is our Deputy City Manager, who will be giving our presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. James, and members of the Executive Committee. Good morning. I am Karen Peters, Deputy City Manager, and had the privilege of assisting this Neighborhoods and City Services Subcommittee along with my colleague, Alan Stevenson, who could not be here today. So on behalf of both of us, I just want to express our thanks to the subcommittee members. And I also want to thank the tremendous work that city staff did to support the subcommittee. So to that end, to my left here today, immediately, Helena Reuter, the Acting Historic Preservation Officer for the city, Rita Hamilton, our city librarian, and then to my far left, Joe Giudice, our Public Works Department Director. So let me start by outlining that we had 3 categories of project, as Mr. James identified. There on the left, you have 3 projects identified by the Library Department, 2 new library branches and 1 library expansion projects, totaling $29.6 $8.5 million in proposed needs after the project estimates were revised. And then there in the center, city facilities, 3 programs were identified by the Public Works Department to address significant deferred maintenance and the Americans with Disabilities Act improvements, totaling $30.3 million in proposed needs. And then over on the right, this category, 3 historic preservation grant programs and 2 rehabilitation and restoration projects were proposed, totaling $6.5 million. After taking into account corrected estimates for the library projects, the starting value for the prioritized capital needs that this subcommittee looked at was $66.3 million rather than the $52.4 million identified in the capital needs study. So to the ranking, let me walk through very briefly. So here you can see each of the prioritized projects and programs with the ranking and funding levels recommended by the subcommittee. As you can see, the subcommittee did the work of reducing the overall total from the original $66.3 million to approximately $54.7 million. Those figures are in the column on the far right. So I'm going to talk about each of these in more detail. First, top-ranked project is a new branch library at the Estrella Village Civic Space. Estrella Village, which reaches from the I-10 to the Salt River and from the edge of downtown Phoenix all the way to the city's westernmost edge, is now a major hub for residential and commercial development. A new 13,000 square foot library as part of Phase 1 of the Estrella Village Civic Space at 91st Avenue and Lower Buckeye Road will provide critical access to computers and the internet, library services, materials, and resources to the families and communities south of I-10 and to the western border of Phoenix. The total project cost is estimated to be over $11 million, with the GO bond funding providing over $8.5 million and $3 million coming from collected impact fees. Ranked number 2, City Facility Americans with Disability Act compliance improvements. In 2021, an initiative between the city's Equal Opportunity Office and the Public Works Department was commissioned to conduct assessments of existing city buildings to identify areas of possible concern regarding ADA compliance. This program is a scalable $10.1 million program designed to address those needs at facilities across the city as they are prioritized based on the ADA assessment that is currently underway. So examples of those improvements are accessible ramps, doors, walkways, etc. Ranked number 3, our Yucca Library branch expansion. So Yucca Library, which first opened in June of 1969, making it 53 years old, is located on 15th Avenue just south of Christown Spectrum Mall. The Yucca Library is currently a 10,000 square foot facility which regularly experiences heavy foot traffic and a high demand for access to computers, Wi-Fi, library programs, and materials. Yucca is often our library system's 5th busiest library behind larger libraries such as Mesquite, which is twice as big. An expansion of Yucca Library by 10,000 square feet will double the current size to 20,000 square feet and significantly improve Yucca's services. Total estimated cost is $10.6 million. The next project in the ranking is a new branch library at Desert View Civic Space. The Desert View Village, north of the 101 and east of I-17, is one of the fastest growing areas of Phoenix. A new 13,000 square foot library as part of Phase 1 of the Desert View Civic Space at East Deer Valley Drive and Tatum Boulevard will provide critical access to computers and the internet, library services, materials, and resources to the families and communities located within this Loop 101 urban core. Total project cost is estimated to be almost $12 million, with the GO bond funding providing over $10 million and $1.5 million coming from collected impact fees. The Historic Preservation Program, as I mentioned, the original request included 3 different grant programs and 2 capital improvement projects for city-owned historic properties, with a combined total of over $6.4 million. The subcommittee thought hard about this and voted to combine these different programs to create one historic preservation grant program to be used for either private or city-owned properties at a dollar amount of $5 million, and resulted in the subcommittee ranking of 5th. And then just for the context, this table provides a breakdown of the initial HP funding requests submitted to the subcommittee and gives us context. So what is combined here are the 3 grant programs: the exterior rehabilitation, the demonstration project, and the warehouse and threatened building program, along with the capital projects at the Orpheum Theater and Heritage Square. The one proposed grant funding pot will afford HP staff the flexibility to shift funds from one program to another over the 5-year period to ensure that funds are spent in preparation for the next GO bond in 5 years. Next, the City Service Center property improvements. So the Public Works Department commissioned studies by professional engineers to assess the condition of service center properties at 4 locations across the city. City service centers are the base of operations for many city functions that directly serve the public, such as street transportation, water services, solid waste collection and recycling, among others. An estimated $40 million in needs was identified for items such as roofs, electrical systems, plumbing, etc. The original request in the capital needs study was for $10.1 million. The subcommittee reduced that amount to $5 million to provide a total budget to the executive committee that more closely aligned with the assigned budget. Similarly, last but not least, our downtown city property improvements. So the downtown Phoenix government campus includes Phoenix City Hall, Calvin C. Good Municipal Building, Phoenix Municipal Court, and the 305 and Adams Street garages. Facility condition assessments conducted in 2021 note that each of these facilities have major building systems that are failing or obsolete and scheduled for replacement. The current capital improvement needs for these are in excess of $38 million. The amount in the project request was $10.1. The subcommittee again reduced that amount to $5 million to more closely align with the assigned budget. So to recap, we have these 7 projects and programs totaling $54.7 million. I want to again thank the chairman and members of the subcommittee for the excellent discussion and thoughtful work to reduce this amount to $54 million. Thank you. And we're happy to answer any questions. I have excellent staff here ready to go.
Well, thank you very much, Manager Peters and Chairman James. Let me ask the members of the Executive Committee if you have any questions or need for clarification. Pam.
Thank you,
Madam Chair, I have a question. I apologize.
Interested in the second project regarding the ADA improvements. I'm curious, do we have city facilities now that are out of ADA compliance? And do we just not have access to people with disabilities to those particular buildings?
Chairwoman, we work closely with the Equal Opportunity Department to evaluate. So there's a series of ways in which we address any ADA compliance issues that we identify as we're doing an ongoing project. So for example, right now in City Hall, we're replacing the sewer line. And as we are going through restrooms, if there's an ADA issue that's identified, we will upgrade that. So the ADA law is kind of continuously going through changes and adjustments, and as that law is updated, then we will evaluate our facilities against the new conditions of the law. And as we make building improvements, that's when we need to make adjustments to those building and facilities. This program is really designed to get out ahead of that a little bit more than just waiting for a project or a system failure, but to actually be able to have a source of funding to be able to address ADA compliance needs as they are identified rather than as we get to them somewhere down the road.
Thank you. Other questions?
Madam Chair, I do have a follow-up question to that, if I might try to phrase that a little bit differently. Based on the 2021 assessment, would you say the needs outweigh the amount recommended?
Yes, the assessment actually is still underway. It's I think the Equal Opportunity Department indicated that it'll be ongoing over the course of several years. We are confident that the identified needs will be significantly more than the programmed amount, but would be a reasonable and appropriate amount for us to be investing in. Again, as the manager pointed out, we have to be able to also complete these projects. That's also an important consideration as well.
Thank you. Other questions?
Madam Chair, this is Jennifer Grundle. I have a question.
Yes.
First, thank you. I apologize I'm virtual. I have a family illness that I've had to contend with. Mine is regard to number 6 and number 7, the public works. They were split in half. You cut them from 10 million to 5 million, and I would like to know what the cuts were. Not specifically, but in a general way, because that's a significant cut at 50% for each of those items.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ms. Grunholm. You're absolutely right. They were cut exactly in half. What is important to recognize about each of those programs is that they are scalable, and that the subcommittee felt that we could get some work accomplished with the funds allocated, recognizing that the need is significantly greater. I think that it's important, and the final report of the subcommittee does reflect this. The subcommittee absolutely felt that these needs could not be deferred, but they did not want to, in order to reach the budgeted amount, they elected to make these cuts. And I'll ask Joe to add anything to that I missed.
Karen, I think you hit it perfectly. Thank you.
Jennifer, the one thing I would add, and Karen kind of mentioned it a little bit, a few years ago we went through a process to revise our major maintenance of city facilities, where we have now a very formal process where all projects get scored on a very broad spectrum matrix. So there are some of these projects that would, again, be competing for some of the major maintenance money that we've now got dedicated out of the general fund, which I believe, Amber, correct me if I'm wrong, is about $15 million $13 million annually.
Madam Chair,
Thank you.
I have a couple of quick questions. Just following up on the ADA, I didn't have the pleasure of chairing a subcommittee, so I watched several of them online. And one of them I watched was the Arts and Culture Subcommittee, and there was an item on that subcommittee that you came in and talked about, which was, and I think the committee's recommending $5.8 million for ADA accessibility for the Phoenix Theater. And I just think it would be helpful for this group to understand whether or not it would have an opportunity to fund that project through this fund, or whether there's just too much other need and that needs to be considered on top of this recommendation.
Chairwoman and committee member Neymark. As I said at that committee meeting, we were not earmarking funding specifically from this particular program to any specific project, very intentionally, because as the needs are identified through the assessments, we wanted to be able to prioritize the needs that are most critical with the Equal Opportunity Department. And so thus, at this point, and that would consume over half of the entire program if that were to be funded. and we think that would leave an inadequate amount of funds to complete other projects that are prioritized as well.
Great, thank you. My second question has to do with libraries. I noticed, the committee, both the staff in its prioritization and the committee, I think there were 4 new libraries in the total of the packages. And just thinking about the city manager's comment about equity, I'm just trying to understand, how did the staff come to the conclusion, and how did the committee come to the conclusion that the 2 that are recommended here are more important to pursue than the 2 that were in the future needs categories? I can't even remember where they are. One was Ahwatukee, and I think one was far southwest or West Phoenix.
Correct. Committee members, Mr. Neymark. Yes, it's population growth was the major factor that we looked at. And also, of course, there were property was already in the cities. We already own the property. So we looked at also how far would people have to travel and where the other branches are located. And so being far north, that's filling a gap in our service. And on the west side, same thing, filling a gap in our service. So.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Please.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, this might be a question for Jeff and the area. Are any of the projects, is there an opportunity with the infrastructure bill that's coming down that can fund any of these projects, not just for this specific one, but the one prior to? And if that is the case, would we be able to see some of that possibility as we're looking at funding some of these projects and having to cut?
Chairman Harper, members of the executive committee, that's part of the concept that we kind of evaluated in terms of whether or not the infrastructure bill money would be available to supplement some of the various programs. I can't say specifically off the top of my head that libraries and things fall directly into some of that. I have to go back and research that and come back to you. But that is stuff that we took into account when we were looking at the programs as a whole, and as I set my targets, that was some of what we looked at.
Thank you. I was actually looking at some of those improvement projects that were on the list. Not specifically the libraries.
Like the Heritage Square and things like that some of those types of projects. I'd have to go back and look, Joe. I don't know if you know. I don't think they are eligible for any of the infrastructure money, but I'd have to look definitively to answer that.
Thank you.
Other members with questions or comments? Yes, please.
I'm sorry I missed that presentation, but what was the thinking behind that?
Could you repeat the question?
Okay, it was the, I believe it's the 8th priority.
You're asking, what is the question specifically? I'm sorry, I'm not understanding.
Can you describe that to me?
The Dupa House?
Mm-hmm.
Karen.
Certainly. Thank you, Madam Chair, Member Wilcox. The Dupa House is one of the future capital needs that was identified in the capital needs study, and the subcommittee did evaluate that and rank it. It did rank below the other projects as we completed that ranking exercise, and Helena can speak specifically to the project.
Okay, that's okay. I just, if it's not a priority, that's fine with me. There is a big debate in the community over whether it should be renovated or not. So I think that'll give enough time for the community to make a decision. So.
And if I may, Madam Chair and Chair Member Wilcox, it was discussed by the committee that potentially some of the general funds through the grant program could be used towards that restoration if it was decided.
Okay. All right. So it won't be in this bond. The committee did not put it forward as a priority for this bond then.
It wasn't a specific priority, but there was the idea that there could be the potential to use some of this sort of pot of grant funds for historic preservation to potentially match with parks if money was available.
Okay. Just for the subcommittee's information, the community has a big debate about it. Many people think that, that it should not be restored to the fullest and maybe just clean it up because there's a debate, and it goes back a long, long time, but the American Legion Post 41, many of the members there felt that the founder of the Dupa House had Confederate ties, and they were up in arms about it. So, okay, just for your information. Okay.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Chairman James?
Yes, Madam Chair. Again, I want to thank the city staff and the members of my subcommittee. We worked very hard in compromising and putting this forth before you. And I hope that the executive committee will take this into consideration moving forward as we deal with everything else. Thank you.
We appreciate that and all of the comments and the dialogue as well. So now I would like to ask the Housing, Human Services, and Homelessness Subcommittee Chairman, Diane Yazzie Devine, and city staff to present.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dee Dee Yazzie Devine, and I want to begin by thanking all the Phoenix residents who took the time to provide thoughtful public input to the Housing, Human Service, and Homeless Subcommittee, and for the 9 members of the subcommittee for their time, commitment, and extensive knowledge to come together to recommend 8 projects totaling $102.1 million, and the City of Phoenix staff who provided extensive information to the committee to assist the committee in making an informed decision on the gaps, needs, and prioritization of the 8 projects. These recommendations are supported by the Arizona Housing Coalition, and in the words of the coalition, given the urgent state of homelessness and housing instability within the city of Phoenix, there is a need for municipal government action. With a 34% increase in unsheltered and sheltered homelessness between 2020 and 2022, an increase in significant rent costs and eviction filing rates, the affordable housing crisis in Phoenix requires the preservation of existing units, the development of new housing, as it meets the immediate needs of those currently experiencing homelessness. I also want to acknowledge the other subcommittees, their recommendations, hard work, and passion. However, without a safe, affordable place to live in Phoenix, Phoenix residents could be excluded or unable to participate in many other of the committee's services. The Housing and Human Services and Homeless Committee recommends 8 projects totaling $1.2.1 million to move forward with support in order to have a significant impact in meeting the gaps in services and housing supply in order to address Phoenix's growing affordable housing crisis. I wanted to just say that our housing and homeless, there weren't any initial homeless projects in the original recommendations by city staff, and the committee felt extremely committed to making sure that there was homeless projects added to our recommendations, which unfortunately led to that increase. And I also wanted to just say one of the other points of our committee that was spoke about repeatedly was to look at other city projects and other committees are doing, libraries, senior centers, to include an affordable housing component when addressing, to combine that leverage of housing with all other city services whenever possible. At this point, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Gina Montez, who will provide the city staff's overview.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Executive Committee, and thank you especially to Chairman Devine and the work of the subcommittee in getting to this point. I also want to introduce some colleagues with me who are here to answer questions. To my left, Marshall Franklin, Human Services Director. Titus Matthew, who is Housing Director, and Rachel Milne, who is the new Director of our Homeless Solutions, Office of Homeless Solutions. So this is a summary of the projects recommended by the subcommittee, as Chairman Devine discussed, and it totals $102 million, roughly. I'll go through each project in detail. The first project supports the preservation of the city's affordable housing portfolio. 95% of residents in these units make less than 50% of the area median income. The request for $33 million is to help preserve affordable housing units. The City of Phoenix affordable housing portfolio consists of 19 apartment complexes. This portfolio has more than 2,300 housing units that are not public housing, nor are they federally funded. The average age of the affordable properties is 43 years, and the oldest complex is 67 years old. The funding will help identify critical needs by funding physical needs assessments to make needed repairs to HVAC, mechanical, electrical, plumbing repairs, health and safety improvements, and to provide Phoenix residents with safe and affordable housing options. The second ranked project is the Cesar Chavez Senior Center. This project cost is a total of $9.74 million, of which $5.71 million would come from the 2023 bond program, and $4 million would be coming from a previous land sale. Funding would be for the construction of a new 12,600 square foot multi-purpose senior center, which would be located adjacent to the new Cesar Chavez Community Center at 37th Avenue and Baseline Road. This proposed center would also include a food production facility where congregate meals would be prepared for other senior centers without production kitchens, and home-delivered meals would also be prepared for Phoenix seniors. The proposed senior center would serve seniors in the Levine/South Mountain area, and currently more than 1,000 senior center members reside near the proposed location. And in addition, more than 25,000 adults 55 years and older reside near this proposed location. The next project is the McDowell Senior Center renovation at a cost of $1.76 million. Originally constructed in 1956, this center is located at 19th Street and McDowell Road, and in December 2020 was listed on the Phoenix Historic Property Register as well as the National Register of Historic Places. It is more than 10,000 square feet and is one of the 3 existing food production facilities. The necessary renovations are to modernize all HVAC equipment, update electrical and fire suppression systems, replace existing plumbing, and restore the building envelope and interior office and meeting spaces. This building has very old systems, and these renovations will preserve a historic city-owned building, extend the useful life of critical equipment, improve functionality of the building and visitor experience, ensure continuity of service, and add efficiencies that will provide for energy and water consumption improvements. The next project is $22.5 million for the acquisition and renovation of property to provide shelters for community members experiencing homelessness. Bond funding would allow for either congregate or non-congregate shelter with locations to be identified. This could include an existing building suitable for retrofit and or hotel conversion or other non-congregate option. The funding would support building renovations for residential occupancy with a maximum of 200 beds per site. Operating costs are estimated at $4 million per site, with 2 sites annually, with 2 sites estimated at $8 million annually. Again, our estimates are that this $22.5 million would support up to 2 locations. Preliminary discussions are that it would be 1 congregate and 1 non-congregate facility, which would be like a hotel conversion or other similar non-congregate option. But the subcommittee asked that it be open and flexible such that we would be able to identify the best mix of what's available when we do our search for properties at that time. The next ranked project is the Choice Neighborhoods Housing Development Gap Funding. In July 2018, the Housing Department was awarded a Choice Neighborhoods Implementation Grant by HUD in the amount of $30 million. The Choice Neighborhoods program helps communities transform neighborhoods by redeveloping severely distressed public housing and catalyzing critical improvements in the neighborhood. Due to the pandemic and other reasons, labor and material costs have increased, leading to increase in projected overall construction costs. There are currently 364 units as part of this plan without sufficient funding to complete the Sidney P. Osborne redevelopment. Without bond funding, these units will not be completed timely, and the community revitalization of the area would be delayed, impacting our affordable housing residents. Back up. The Choice Neighborhoods Grant has been a 6-year comprehensive implementation process, replacing 577 obsolete public housing units with more than 1,000 mixed income units. In this housing crisis, this project has allowed us to double the initial number of obsolete public housing units to provide much-needed affordable housing to Phoenix residents, and the leverage of a tremendous amount of dollars through the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program. The Innovation in Affordable Housing Program is a request from the Housing, Human Services, and Homelessness Subcommittee. The project provides pre-approved building plans at no cost to individuals or developers that are interested in affordable housing development. These plans include accessory dwelling units, duplexes, single-family, and possibly tiny homes. The implementation of the program will start by hosting a competition to attract architects to generate plans designed to support the affordable housing program. Program goals are to reduce building time by providing free approved plans, create a site to post the building plans, a website that is, and overall save money on project permitting costs. This program is another tool to help support the Housing Phoenix Plan's goal of creating and preserving 50,000 units by 2030. The request for this project is currently $1 million. However, at this point, there are project costs of $500,000 that are eligible for bond financing. The Affordable Housing Development Gap Financing Program is also a request from the Housing, Human Services, and Homelessness Subcommittee. Funding would be used to assist in the development and rehabilitation of affordable housing. A gap financing program would provide support in 4 key focus areas: affordable multifamily rental housing, special needs housing, homeownership assistance loans, preserving affordable housing rehabilitation home loans for developers of affordable housing. As the costs of materials and labor continue to rise with inflation, developers are struggling to build affordable housing properties, leaving many Phoenix residents struggling to pay rent in our current market. Support of the program would help preserve and create quality, sustainable, affordable housing to meet the needs of low-income residents. The next project is the proposed expansion of the Parsons Center for Health and Wellness for $6.88 million. This building is located at Central Avenue and Roosevelt Street. The Human Services Department has an operating agreement with the Parsons Center for Health and Wellness, which provides the services. And under their Southwest Center for AIDS HIV agency, providing affirming and inclusive services to promote well-being and advance health equity for diverse communities and all those seeking compassionate care, especially people of color, LGBTQIA+, and queer individuals, and those affected by HIV. Expansion of the building would allow the increase of HIV and AIDS treatment and prevention services, such as testing, treatment, and prevention, and culturally responsive primary care, especially for people of color, LGBTQIA+ communities, and those affected by HIV. Again, the project expansion cost is $6.88 million. Madam Chair, members of the committee, this concludes the proposed projects in rank order of the subcommittee, and we're available for questions.
Thank you. Great explanation and report. Let me ask members of the executive committee if you have any questions or clarifications that you'd like to bring up now.
I thought the committee was really good at hitting some of the high points. But on the number 6, is that for infill? Is that for people to do infill, or is it just new affordable housing?
I'll just address that and then turn it over to Gina. But it was meant to be innovative. We need innovative approaches to really move all different types of housing forward. And it's still being explored by staff, what's eligible and ineligible. So I'll turn that over to Gina Montes.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Member Wilcox. Yes, this idea came as an option to provide plans, and it could be infill. My understanding is it could be infill projects. For example, if there were to be a program with affordable dwelling units that moved forward, this would be pre-approved plans is how it was envisioned, so to save money in terms of design costs for those looking to do development of housing. And in particular, I think infill would make a lot of sense for the most part, but it also could be for land that is not infill.
Great idea. On number 5, is public housing, is that across the city, or is there certain areas that the old public housing is going to be targeted?
Madam Chair, Member Wilcox, this is for the Choice Neighborhoods project that is generally the Edison East Lake project, so it's an existing.
Up by St. Luke's?
Correct.
Okay. And I have one other question. On the number 8, is this, on the Central and the Parsons, is this going to be a extension of the building, or is it renovation within the building?
Madam Chair, Member Wilcox, this is actually a renovation within the building. There is a 2-story section when you come in that could be made.
Instead
it's
of the
one
big
story.
lobby.
That's a large footprint that could be made into 2 stories.
Okay.
It's within the existing building footprint.
Okay.
He's not very eloquent there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments or questions?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Just sort of like the streets department, you've got a very large number that now we're trying to, figure out how we can get our way back to $500 million and perhaps closer to the city manager's target for this particular area. Are all of these scalable? Except I'm thinking, except maybe the senior centers, or are they all scalable items?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Member Neymark. They are not all scalable. It really depends on the item. I would say the senior centers are definitely not scalable. That's what the project is. For affordable housing preservation, number 1, that one would be scalable, although it has been scaled down quite a bit before coming to the subcommittee and the executive committee. And number 3, the acquisition and renovation of property for shelter, that is somewhat scalable, as 2 projects were planned under that item. Under Choice Neighborhoods, that one is not scalable. That is the gap that we're looking for financing for. And in the innovation and affordable housing program, that one is not scalable, at least it's to the $500,000 minimum at this point. And then on the gap financing, I would say yes, that one is also scalable, number 7. Number 8, I would want to defer to Parsons for that, but I understand that is the estimated project cost for what they are planning.
Thank you. And then I have a question for the subcommittee chair. As we have to, go through the narrowing process, there you are. Is it your sense that it would be better to scale things, or better to start from the bottom and cut full categories as opposed to scaling, if you had to make a choice between those two? And we don't have to decide that today. I just want to get your perspective.
So I'm going to say this committee had 9 very opinionated committee members, and I hate to respond, but I'm going to say in general, we did take seriously the prioritization. So, but also I think they would consider scalability as really important. For example, the service centers from 1956, they really need improvements or they're not going to be operational. So I agree with what Gina said was scalable and what's not, but I would also look at our prioritization.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do we have any projected data on changes in our homeless population, whether increase or decrease? And considering that data, how will this impact those numbers and those projections?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Member Reed, I'm going to have Rachel Milne address that, but before I have her do that, I do want to say that that we welcome additional resources on the homelessness side, and right now we're scaling up a number of projects using additional federal funding and also in partnership with the state and the county on multiple projects as well. So it will make a difference in terms of, I think we're going to continue to need facilities. The population is increasing, but I do believe that we are also at the same time addressing it with some other sources of funding. But I'll have Rachel talk about the projections and what she knows.
Madam Chair, members of the Executive Committee, we monitor the inflow and outflow data of the homeless service system monthly through Maricopa Association of Governments, and the inflow is greater than the outflow at this point. So we are anticipating that to continue for the next at least 1 to 2 years.
Other comments or questions? Yes, please.
St. Paul is right now working with the state, and they have some of the old motor vehicle places they're renting at a very low cost, or the state's giving. Is there a consideration for the new shelter maybe to partner with St. Vincent, or are we going solo?
Madam Chair and Member Wilcox. So that is actually a City of Phoenix project that we're partnering with St. Vincent de Paul and Maricopa County. We're utilizing a city-owned facility, the former MVD building. Maricopa County has paid all of the operational costs all summer, and the City of Phoenix is partnering with Maricopa County to cover the operational costs now through December of 2024. But we are anticipating something similar if that project is funded by the bond subcommittee.
Thank you. One other question on the new shelter, if we can get one or two of them. Is that taking the place of the overflow, or will it be like a shelter similar to CAS?
Madam Chair, Member Wilcox. So this would be in addition to some of the projects we have in the planning stages. As Deputy City Manager Montez said, we have several things planned with our ARPA funds. The MVD building, the former MVD building, that is slated to end eventually. It is an aviation-owned building. So these would be new projects added to the homeless shelter service system.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Other comments or questions?
Madam Chair, question. This is a question to the city representatives and possibly the subcommittee chair. On the prioritization, when I look at 4 and 5, 4 being, and this is very difficult topics, right? Affordable housing and homelessness. If I look at 4 and 5, 4 is 200 beds and it is an ongoing operating cost. When I look at 5 and think about affordable housing, there was 342 units. With no ongoing operating costs. How do we think about the prioritization of 4 above 5? Because if I was just to take the list of your top 4 and cut the line, we would lose potentially 5. But I'd like to think about if you were to swap those for greater impact and no ongoing cost, what that might look like. So I don't know if the committee talked about that.
So I believe it's 400 shelter beds, not 200 in the recommendation. So I just wanted to make sure that's accurate. That's accurate, Gina, right? It's 400 beds, 200 per project.
Yes,
and
up to
it's
200. Up to 200 per project, depending on the site.
So it's 400, and we did take in consideration that is. We had 6 projects that had no operational cost and 2 that did. One that was very small, and then this one is an $8 million. But that was part of our discussion. I think there was just significant commitment to the increasing homeless population in the city of Phoenix. And then I'll turn it over to Gina for a further response.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Member Butler, the operating costs are a consideration for us, and You know, I don't want to, you know, the subcommittee had its priorities, and I respect that and absolutely understand. We're dealing with how to address the growing homeless population on a daily basis. Affordable housing is also a critical priority, to have places for people to live once we kind of engage with them and try to get them out of shelter. The operating costs are a significant issue to consider. Also, recognizing that we have a number of federally funded ARPA projects that we're really happy to have. The operating costs for those projects are being funded out of that one-time amount. And so in the future, we as a city will have to figure out how we're going to fund the projects that we're standing up, for which the funding will expire in a few years, in addition to any new projects that we add online. So, and so just with full disclosure, that is a concern, and that is part of the reason that as staff we hadn't submitted an item, because we had the ARPA dollars. We have Home ARP, which is another $20 million, and we're leveraging funding from the state and county for multiple projects as well. And so, so the operating dollars are a consideration.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for such thoughtful, insightful discussion and great work with the committee and the city staff. Now we're going to move to our final report, which is from the Public Safety Subcommittee Chairman, Steve Burlane, and city staff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me introduce myself real quick. My name's Steve Burline. I'm a recently retired captain of the Phoenix Fire Department, and I am honored to be sitting in this seat holding this position. I'd like to start real quick by thanking Mayor Gallego and the council for the opportunity to chair this GeoBond Public Safety Subcommittee. I'd also like to recognize the dedication and commitment of our Vice Chair, Ann Ender, and each one of our subcommittee members. One of them, who is Thelda Williams, the Honorable Thelda Williams, three-time interim mayor, to chair a committee which Thelda sat on was remarkable with all her experience. And quite honestly, the entire committee, there's probably 100 years of public safety service within all the committee members. It's a really amazing group. We'd also like to thank all of the citizens who took time to participate in the process to this point, and city staff who assisted us on top of their daily responsibilities. The Public Safety Subcommittee, we met 3 times over the past several months to discuss the capital needs of the Phoenix Police and Fire Departments. We reviewed the prioritized projects submitted by each department and the future capital needs that had been identified. The subcommittee also requested and received additional data and information from staff, which was critical to support our decision-making and deliberations. And I would like to recognize a few of these individuals who really, quite honestly, have been working on this for several years. It was at least 2018, under interim mayor Thelda Williams, there was consideration for a public safety bond. So these people have been working on this project for many years. And from Budget and Research, Chris Fazio, Aaron Avila, Amber Williamson, and Stacia Ball. And from the Police Department, Commanders Charles Consolian and Charmaine Osborne. From the Fire Department, Jessica Rothschild, Michael Moreno, Jeff Yilling, Martha Johnson, Rebecca McConnell, Tim Jones, and Sylvia Veninetti. And from the City Manager's Office, Yvonne Soto, Zach Wallace, and of course, our presenters today. As a result of our thorough analysis and discussions, our subcommittee has unanimously recommended and ranked 10 projects to be included in the general obligation bond program. And I just want to highlight that this work that the police and fire department have done to prepare, although our committee has only been in existence for a couple months, they began several years ago. And when they put their needs down several years ago, they were needs then. And here we are 4 or 5 years later. The city has grown. The demands, the pressures on our police officers and our firefighters, our paramedics, with all the essential services that they provide to our community, have grown existentially. So we understand that, like all the other list here. There are definitely more needs than there will be revenue. We respect that fact. Somewhere the line will need to be drawn. We understand that. We respect that. We'll support whatever the final decision is. But to move forward, I've asked that our city manager, Madam Chair, Lori Bays, to assist our subcommittee with a brief overview of the 10 recommended projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Subcommittee Chair Berline, Madam Chair, members of the Executive Committee. I'm pleased to be here today to provide you with just a brief overview of the projects that are recommended by the subcommittee, and then I will ask Executive Assistant Chief Scott Walker and Assistant Chief Mike Kurtenbach to walk through the details of the projects in rank order. Have the slide up, please. Okay, so just to give you a brief overview of the projects that are recommended by the subcommittee, there are a total of 10 projects, 7 of which are fire department projects, 4 of those are fire station replacements, and 3 of those replacements would also allow for the development of a community assistance program site at the old location. 3 new fire stations are recommended amongst those 7 projects as well, one of which would allow for the development of a CAP program site. And for the police department, there are 3 projects: relocation and replacement of the Cactus Park Precinct and Northern Command Station at a joint location, renovation of the property management warehouse, and renovation of the Maryvale Precinct, for a total of just under $191 million in GEO bond funds. 2 of the projects, you'll note with the asterisks, do have additional funding sources. Project number 5 has a funding source of impact fees as well as some federal funding of approximately $5 million, and Project 9 would also have impact fees as part of the project funding if it were to move forward. So now, without further ado, I will turn it over to Executive Assistant Fire Chief Scott Walker.
Thank you, Assistant City Manager Bays. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Executive Committee. Along with myself, Assistant Police Chief Mike Kurtenbach, we'll be providing the committee with a summary, really a brief summary of each of our 10 projects that our Public Safety Committee move forward to you. We'll certainly be happy to answer any questions you may have about our projects. So the first 3 fire department projects may sound similar, but that's because the need is very significant for these 3 projects, and that really the impact to the community will be very similar. So project number 1 is a replacement for fire station number 7 and repurposing of the existing fire station for the community assistance program. Simply put, the current station is no longer functional due to size limitations. The station houses the busiest fire apparatus in the city, and we need more resources in this location to meet the significant demand for service. The project will be to construct a new 18,000 square foot fire station and remodeling the current station for the CAP program. The benefits of this project will be improvements in service delivery to the the Sunny Slope community. The GEO bond cost of this project is estimated at $21.4 million and would result in an ongoing cost of $3.7 million to the general fund. Project number 2 is a replacement of fire station number 13 and will also include the repurposing of the existing station for the community assistance program. Like station number 7, the current fire station number 13 is no longer functional due to size limitations. Of note, this is our smallest and oldest station in the system, more than 60 years in age, and at 3,340 square feet total, including the apparatus base. This station also houses one of the busiest engine companies in the system, one of the top 10 busiest, and simply put, we need more resources in this location to meet the growing demand for our services in this area. This project will be to construct also a new 18,000 square foot fire station and the remodeling of the current station for the CAP program. Benefits of this project will be improvements in service delivery to the Arcadia community. The GEO bond cost of this project is $21.7 million and would also result in an ongoing cost of $3.7 million to the general fund. I note the ongoing cost for fire stations is because we will need additional staff to have the impact and service delivery. It does require additional apparatus and different personnel assigned to those stations. Project number 3 is a replacement of fire station number 15, which also will include a CAP location. This will include repurposing the existing station for the community assistance program. Once again, the current fire station number 15 is no longer functional due to size limitations. The station also houses one of the top 10 busiest fire apparatus in the city, and we need more resources in this location to meet the demand. The project will be to construct an 18,000 square foot fire station and a remodeling of the current station for the CAP program. Again, the benefits of this project will be improvements to service delivery to the Maryvale community. And the GO bond cost of this project will be $21.4 million and will have an ongoing cost of $3.7 million to the general fund.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, as was said earlier, my name is Mike Kurtenbach. I'm going to go over the police department projects. You'll see Scott and I going back and forth as we do this, so I apologize for that. But we wanted to present them in rank order. So item number 4 is the relocation of the police Cactus Park precinct in the Northern Command Station, one located at 39th Avenue in Cactus and the other at 302 East Union Hills. Both are what I would consider to be vintage facilities built early 1980s. Both have millions of dollars in ongoing needs and maintenance costs. So the scope is to take these two separate facilities and relocate them into one place so we can have a more efficient police operation, one that meets the modern needs of policing today that have significantly evolved since the early 1980s. It will also afford us the opportunity to have dedicated community space like we have in the Estrella Mountain, Mountain View, and Black Mountain precincts that don't exist in some of our older facilities, and ensure enhanced continuity of service. The cost for this is significant. As you can see, it is a little over $49 million, but there are no anticipated ongoing costs as staff will be relocated from existing facilities to these facilities, this new combined facility.
Project number 5, back to the fire department, is a new fire station number 51, which will be located at 51st Avenue and the State Route 303 in Northwest Phoenix. With the construction of the TSMC wafer chip plant in Northwest Phoenix, and the significant growth that will occur as a result, the need for additional capacity, including a hazardous material response capability, is necessary to ensure adequate service delivery to the community. The project will be to construct a new 30,000 square foot fire station that will house an engine company, a ladder company, a rescue or an ambulance, a battalion chief company, and a hazardous material response support unit. This is important because the entire Northwest Phoenix is going to be have significant development really to support the TSM chip plant that will need that hazardous material response. The impact of this project will be to provide the fire department with the needed resources to meet the needs of this area. The GO bond cost of the project is estimated at $18.5 million and will result in an ongoing cost of $7.5 million to the general fund. As City Manager Bays mentioned, the reduction, or what seems smaller than the other costs we put forward for the other fire stations, is because there are impact fees and federal funding that we have applied for that will help support this project.
Item number 6 is the police property management warehouse renovation. This property management warehouse is located at 100 East Elwood, just south of the river bottom. Originally constructed in 1992, as you can see, it was designed to hold up to 1.2 million items of evidence. We are now at 1.8 million items. Subcommittee Chair Berline and the members of the Public Safety Subcommittee saw pictures showing the state of the property management warehouse, the current condition that it's in. This money would allow for the renovation and updating of the warehouse facility, would allow for the construction of a dedicated administration building which does not exist today. Also, and what's key for us to see prosecution through to its fullest is to ensure the preservation and protection of crime scene evidence consistent with industry standards, to reduce disruptions, to have a more seamless capability when it comes to people retrieving property from that facility. The total project cost is estimated to be just over $9 million with no additional ongoing operational costs.
Project number 7 is a new fire station, station number 70, which will be located at 39th Avenue and Cactus Road. Currently, the area that will be served by fire station number 70 is a gap in our system. We are estimating that the engine company assigned to Station 70 will respond to over 2,800 calls for service in year 1. The project will be to construct a new 18,000 square foot fire station that will house an engine and rescue company when it opens, and will also provide for support for the new CAP program, a location to run a unit out of that station. The impact of this project will be to allow the department to better meet the needs of this community. And the GO bond cost of the project is estimated at $18 million and will result in an ongoing cost of $3.7 million.
Project number 8 is renovation of the Maryvale Police Precinct located at 6180 Weston Cano Boulevard. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's located in the southeast corner of Desert West Park. Originally constructed back when I came on 32 years ago, We have over $1 million in deferred maintenance costs for this facility. This funding would allow us to renovate and modernize the facility to bring it more in line with the facilities that I mentioned earlier, particularly Estrella Mountain, Mountain View, and Black Mountain precincts, to allow for that community space. It'll extend the functional life of critical systems within the building and will ensure continuity of service and the modernization of police operations. This total project cost is $2.9 million with no ongoing costs anticipated.
Project number 9 is again a new fire station, station number 74, which will be located at 19th Avenue and Chandler Boulevard. Currently, the area that will be served by fire station number 74 is also a gap in our system that results in extended response times to the Ahwatukee community, the western portion. As growth continues, the impact to service delivery grows as well. The project will be to construct a new 12,000 square foot fire station that will initially house a new engine company. The impact of this project will be allow the department to improve service delivery to the Ahwatukee community. The GO bond cost of this project is estimated at $10.3 million and will result in an ongoing cost of $2.6 million to the general fund. As again mentioned, there are impact fees that will help us support this project. And our 10th and final project is a replacement of fire station number 20, which is located at 7th Avenue and Glendale Road. Much like many of the other projects, the current station is simply no longer functional due to size. I'll apologize, my slide did not move forward. Much like many of the other projects, the current station is no longer functional due to size limitations. The current station houses an engine and ladder company and simply has no additional capacity to add other resources. The project will be to construct a new 20,000 square foot fire station that will allow for needed additional resources to be assigned to the station. The impact of this project will be to allow the department to better meet the growing demands for service in the area served by Station 20. The GO bond cost of the project is estimated at $18 million with an ongoing cost of $3.7 million to the general fund. So this concludes our 10 projects that were moved forward to you.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, that concludes our presentation, and we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, and thank you, Chairman Berlin, and thank you to the speakers. Let me ask if the Executive Committee members have questions or comments. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually have 3 questions, if I could. The first is the public comments around response time for fire station response time were really, really compelling. I'm wondering if you have done any modeling. I think we're at 9 minutes now. What would the impact of these new facilities have on that response time? Would that get us to the national average? Have you looked at that at all?
Madam Chair, Member Cayley, and members of the committee, it is difficult to model with the current software we have if we add a second apparatus or more apparatus into a station to the direct impact. What I can tell you is this. We know that our issue isn't as much travel time, meaning the time from apparatus travels from a station to an incident. We can meet the 4-minute travel time standard in most of Phoenix. Our issue is the activity level. So our apparatus are so busy, they're on other calls, so they are unable to take additional calls that occur in their primary response area. For instance, station number 7 on one project, that unit will run almost 6,000 calls for service this year. We know, and I can prove through data, that they are missing approximately 28% of calls that occur in their primary response do. So what that means is you have a secondary response from another apparatus from a further distance, so that travel time now is not within the 4-minute standard, and that's what drives up our response times. So we can, and we do know that by adding the second apparatus into a station in 7's primary response area, we're going to reduce the times that a unit will not be available, thus having to have that second response. So I can't prove quantitatively what the impact will be. I can tell you there will be a direct impact to that because we know we'll be available to take the calls that are occurring in the area.
Thank you. That's helpful. Next question is for Chief Kurtenbach. The project number 4, the command center relocation, could you help me understand the impact if we don't do it? What would happen if that didn't get done?
So, Madam Chair, Executive Committee Member Cahaley, so we're a little different than fire. As we just talked about response times, but I focus on service delivery and the modernization of facilities. We can make it work, but it's becoming increasingly more cumbersome to do so. And I'll talk about the evolution of policing during my tenure and since this building was constructed. We don't have the capacity We have the capacity in more modern facilities to test drugs, to store biological and other evidence in those modern facilities that we don't have in these older facilities. Cactus Park Precinct, for example, still has ashtrays inside the restrooms of that facility to provide some context on how old it is. I used the word vintage before. We're having to construct outbuildings just to house critical infrastructure and systems to keep them up and running because of modern technology. As we talk about camera systems, shot spotter detection systems, and what we have, the existing facilities where they're located and the way they're constructed can't support that technology. Can't support for what I believe is going to come in the future, growth in line of where we were as a department and where I hope we will be in terms of our staffing. And that's then putting those combined facilities in a location that would better serve the needs of the community to enhance our service delivery to the community. Can we keep going without new construction? We can, but there's a cost associated with that in terms of the overall service to the community that we're entrusted to serve.
Thank you. And my last question, and I actually have no idea who to direct this to, it's a general question. On all of these projects, we made the point of outlining where there's ongoing costs. But generally, when you have projects, there are projects that actually reduce costs going forward. And I'm wondering if that was just not something that was contemplated, or is that something we could add as a consideration? Because I would think, for instance, consolidations, there's probably some savings that occur in those scenarios. I don't know, but I'm using that as an example. Are some of these costs reducing from an ongoing perspective?
Chairman Harper, members of the committee, I'll let Amber expand on my answer, but I think in terms of the project in particular that Chief Kurtenbach mentioned, those two projects don't have an operating expense because you're taking the existing footprint of the operating O&M and applying it to the new facility, and the new facility would be modernized and wouldn't have as much maintenance. So I think the direction that we gave staff did provide some latitude for them to kind of make that analysis, and where possible, that's probably offsetting some of the O&M that you see presented to you, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, please.
Yes, so as I looked at the replacing versus new fire stations, I'm curious, what is the process of replacing an existing fire station, and why does it look like that cost of replacement averages about $5 million more per station than to build a new station?
Madam Chair, Committee Member Reed, so the first three projects include in that cost funding to repurpose the existing station. So our plan is to build a new station that will allow us to have more apparatus in the station, for instance, 7, 13, and 15. But we're going to retain the current station, remodel, repurpose that station for our CAP units. So there's funding attached to that remodel cost. That's why those three projects seem a little higher than, or are higher than the other costs. If you look at the new construction prices, they're more consistent in that $18 million range.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Yes. Mary Rose and then Devaney.
On your priorities, were any of these slated for the second priority of another bond, or are they all due right now?
So, Madam Chair, Member Wilcox, some of these were in the future capital needs list initially. There were originally 8 projects on the list, and 2 additional projects were added as the committee elected to prioritize all of the projects, the prioritized capital needs as well as the future capital needs, and then drew the line at 10 of the 15 total projects. So that's how the process went in the subcommittee. So it is in addition to the originally presented 8 projects.
Okay. Which ones were the new ones added?
Please correct me if I'm wrong, gentlemen, but I believe they were number 9 and number 10, Fire Station 74 and Fire Station 20. Is that correct?
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please.
The Community Assistance Program is mentioned in replacement or new fire station locations. Could you talk about how important that program is and why it's critical that it be included within the fire stations?
Madam Chair, Committee Member Proust, So the CAP program, the fire department's managed and operated a crisis response program for many, many years. Under the direction of Mayor and Council, we were funded to really expand significantly into what I would now call a community advocacy program. We're very optimistic about the impact that's going to have on the community. And some of the other issues you heard from the other subcommittees are those experiencing homelessness and really identifying the gap between police and fire, what is the need in the community. And this program is designed to meet that need and really reduce the impact to the police and fire department having to respond on calls that truly better people, more qualified people can have an impact. So one of the priorities we had as we looked at the projects we brought forward is how can we support that program with locations to run and operate a unit out of. And so if you notice, they're really strategically placed around the city, one in the east part of Phoenix, one in the west, one in the north. And so a lot of thought went into that. How can we, at the same time of supporting the fire department response, but also support our new CAP program? So a lot of effort went into that. We do believe there's real impact that we'll have in the community from public safety and the more grand sense of what public safety is with the CAP program and including these projects.
One more, yes.
Madam Chair, I have a question for Chief Walker. The CAP program, do you foresee that just relieving pressure on the fire services or police and fire? The demands of the community from police and fire?
Madam Chair and Committee Member Berline, we definitely see it having a positive impact on both police and fire. The police department and the fire department working together with the city on this, developing this program. For instance, we're looking at what calls could be sent ultimately to the CAP program that maybe a police officer doesn't have to respond to, a fire operator doesn't have to respond to, or when police officers, firefighters respond to a call and realize this is maybe a mental health call or another issue, that we can then have the CAP unit respond and take over that call and get that person that's in need maybe into a system and really help put that person in a situation where they never have to call 911 because we'll get them the right resources, get them into the system. So 100% the impact would be both to police and fire and really I would say city services as a whole as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very great.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
We throw acronyms around. Can you explain what CAP is, please? When you mention CAP, it doesn't.
Madam Chair.
And then I have a couple of other questions.
Committee Member Martin, I apologize. We certainly are in the acronym business in the public safety. So CAP stands for Community Assistance Program. As I said, we've originally had what we called our crisis response program that with the direction of Mayor and Council and funding and really expanding in the Community Assistance Program, and that program is expanding significantly to a citywide initiative. So Community Assistance Program, and we refer to it as the CAP program.
And then, Madam Chair, members of the committee, Mr. Walker, you've heard a lot about the supply problem that we have and some of the workforce challenges the industry has, not to mention the fact that the city of Phoenix will have to have a procurement process to put these fire stations in. Are there, and what I would implore the committee to think about is we're not only looking at a 5-year timeline here, we're looking at potentially incrementally 5-year timelines, and that's sort of the basis for my thought on this question. Is it reasonable to expect that we can deliver every single one of these projects within that 5-year timeline, or does the procurement process take any of these outside of, and this would also apply to the police department too, and all of our projects actually. Is there any thought that this would fall outside, any of these projects would fall outside that 5-year timeline?
Madam Chair, Committee Member Martin, that is an excellent question, and that is something that the Public Safety Subcommittee did discuss at length in our committee meetings. It is fair to say that it would be a significant challenge to complete all of these projects within a 5-year time frame. There is the possibility that some of these projects may end up being pushed outside of that time frame should they all move forward. There could be some benefit to considering looking at the priority order that has been presented to you and which can feasibly be moved forward within that 5-year time frame. If they were to be moved forward, we would put every effort into moving those projects forward, just as quickly and as smoothly as possible, but it would be a significant challenge.
And then one follow-up,
Chairman, if
Madam
I may,
Chair. Yes.
if I may, before that, the other thing I would add to that is the consideration of the ongoing O&M attached to all of these programs. A lot of this is staff, as Scott mentioned, and as Chairman Berline mentioned. The operating costs that we show today are based on what today's costs are. Those costs incrementally go up as we go through labor negotiations. The other thing I would mention to you is the ongoing costs of the facilities themselves, and this is across the entirety of everything we're talking about, not just public safety. We're seeing significant inflationary pressure on a fire station and significant inflation on just the cost of raw materials. So if we don't get these things done in the 3-year window, you can expect that the cost will continue to escalate and they will likely exceed the resources available. We had that happen to us with the 06 bond program, and Rick remembers that. We had to defer right off the bat $150 million worth of projects that voters voted on because of the dip in the economy and then the escalation in pricing. So I think a lot of those things are things that we need to take into account, which is also kind of part where I came up with my targets and evaluating that.
Madam
Last
Chair,
question.
Madam Chair, to that point, Mr. Barton, do you have a list of the professions that you're expected to go into collective bargaining with over the next, when does the collective bargaining agreement terminate, and then what professions will you be going into collective bargaining with?
The way we actually do our contracts at the city, we negotiate with all of our labor groups. So that's every classification across the city, with the exception of my own. So we actually will be increasing more than likely compensation for every single position within the city of Phoenix.
And you said that a 1% increase is $14 million
1%
to the general
14,
fund.
yes.
Okay. And last question, I'm sorry, Madam Chair. I noticed there's a difference in square footage size. You have a 12,000 square foot, 18,000 square foot, 30,000 square foot fire. Is there an efficiency that occurs there with a larger facility, or is it just based on density? You need to educate me on how that works.
Madam Chair, Committee Member Martin, thank you for the question. So so we look at really the community where that station is going to be located. For instance, in the Station 74, it's located in West Ahwatukee. We can reasonably assume and know what type of growth will happen there. We can know what type of resources, how many resources over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years would need to be there based on the growth potential. So that station, for instance, is 12,000 square feet. It'd be a three-bay station. That station will meet our needs today and well into the future. The station up by the new Station 51 by the TSMC chip plant, for instance, that station is going to be much significantly larger at 30,000 square feet because it will need an engine company, a ladder company, an ambulance company, battalion chief, and a hazardous material response unit. So it's really dictated by where it's going to go, the growth potential in area, those types of things, and the type of resources that will need to be assigned to that station.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. And at this point in the meeting, I wanted to, again, recognize and appreciate the great dialogue that took place here today, the work, the chairman, the subcommittee members, all of the city staff. Excellent. So we appreciate that.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry. I have just a quick question, unless we don't have time for it today. Okay. The operating costs associated with the replacement of fire stations, is that all related to the community assistance program, or is there something I'm missing?
Madam Chair and Committee Member Niemark, so the replacement stations, to add the value we need, as I mentioned, we need more resources, so the ongoing costs are to add more resources to those stations. For instance, Station 20 has an engine and ladder today, but a larger station will need a second engine and a rescue potentially, and that's what those costs reflect.
Great, and then that TSMC station is, obviously really needed for, because of what's going on up there. But it's like 5 minutes from Peoria, and I feel like that station on a day in and day out basis is mostly going to be serving Peoria residents for regular EMS calls and that kind of thing. Can you talk about how you deal with that in the fire service?
Madam Chair and Committee Member Niemark, so with our automatic aid system we have in place, where we work with 23 different jurisdictions crossing boundaries every day to provide really the most seamless service you can imagine to the region of Phoenix, we look at where other fire stations are located. For instance, the Peoria Fire Station is located at Joe Max and approximately 71st Avenue. That station responds into that western part of Phoenix, because Phoenix up in that location, 67th Avenue, is their western boundary. So Peoria does respond into there. So we look at it where our station goes, and we try to keep it about 1.5 to 2 miles from the border. So So that way it may encroach a little into another jurisdiction, but not that much. It creates a very seamless overlap in service delivery, because there will be larger incidents where we'll need Peoria to respond in to help us on that as well. So at 51st Avenue, it really is in that area, still at least 2 miles to the Peoria border. So we believe that is a very good location still if you look at and just think concentric circles for time away from that station to travel for an apparatus.
Thank you. And acknowledging what the city manager said earlier about how programs have to be spread out longer because of costs, the 1988 bond program, which I also worked on, had to be spread out for 12 years because we couldn't afford the operating side of the equation. And so we really, as a committee, need to pay attention to that as much as we pay attention to the size of the program. So I just wanted to make that comment up front. Thank you.
Very valuable discussion. Thank you so much. We'd like to now turn to the public comment period with this agenda item. And let me ask the city attorney to please explain the rule of public comment to the committee meeting members.
Members of the public may speak to comment on the General Obligation Bond Program. The City Code requires speakers to present their comments in a respectful and courteous manner. Profane language, threats, or personal attacks on members of the public, council members, committee members, or staff are not allowed. A person who violates these rules will lose the opportunity to continue to speak. The committee and staff cannot discuss or comment on matters related to pending claims or litigation.
Thank you very much. We have 21 speakers lined up today. We're going to start with the virtual presentations first, or participants, 10 of those, and then 11 who are here with us in the chamber. We're limiting to 2 minutes or less due to our schedule. So I'd like the staff to begin with the virtual members. Let's move forward with that.
Madam Chair, our first virtual speaker is Robert Millikian. Robert, can you hear us? It appears Robert's not on the line. Our next speaker is Ann Abkarian, followed by Wes Patterson. Ann, can you hear us?
I sure can. Thank you so much. My name is Andy Abkarian. I appreciate the opportunity to share this morning. I'm a longtime Phoenix resident and community leader supporting increased livability, economic strength, and long-term sustainability of our city. And this morning I called in to emphasize the importance of fully funding the historic preservation in this bond cycle. It's critical with our limited resources that Phoenix is no holds barred in and commit to the resources, that historic resources we have. As for the value of historic preservation, please consider the following. First, the Place Economics study commissioned by the HP office demonstrated with hard data that historic revitalization pays financial returns to the broader community by quickly increasing tax revenue and spurring further economic development. And in fact, historic preservation grants on private buildings leverage nearly 3 times the amount of the grant in private sector spending. Secondly, the $5 million request, which is a 23% reduction from the initially identified financial need, is only 1% of the total bond and not quite a full percent of the total priorities in the subcommittee recommendations. Third, the HP items will not add operating expenses to the city. Processes and staffing are in place to ensure the project's completion within 5 years. Lastly, and most critically, these are current needs. Historic preservation projects simply can't wait until the next cycle. Monthly, we're losing historic resources and the opportunity to leverage them. So I'm here this morning to request that as the executive committee reviews all these worthy projects, that they recommend the full $5 million allocation to historic preservation as outlined in the subcommittee's final request. Thank you so much for your work and the opportunity to provide input, and special thanks to anybody who could process what I said as quickly as I said it. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Wes Patterson, followed by Steve Schumacher. Wes, can you hear us?
Yes, thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Executive Committee members, for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Wes Patterson, and I'm speaking as a resident of the city of Phoenix, and I'm also speaking as a chapter president of the Phoenix Fire Command Officers Association. I'm a second-generation Phoenix firefighter. I've been on the job for 31 years, and I'm currently a deputy chief. I'm speaking today to ask the Executive Committee to honor the recommendation from the Public Safety Subcommittee. Simply put, we are behind in our ability to provide the excellent service that the community expects. And to put this into a little bit of historical perspective, if you look at the last 50 years or so of Phoenix Fire Department growth compared to the community, in the 70s, we built 7 fire stations. In the 80s, we built 11 fire stations north of the city. However, since that time, since 2011, we have only put into service 1 new fire station. Right. The consequences to the citizens are high quality service, and I know the fire department wants to deliver that. The other impact are to deadly toxins and emergency staffing situations. The increase without a comparable or a like increase in resources is dangerous. I'm asking to please support the recommendations of the Public Safety Subcommittee. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Steve Schumacher, followed by Ann Baumspark. Steve, can you hear us?
Great. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. Just real quickly, last weekend, I was lucky enough to be able to attend the 100th anniversary celebration of Memorial Hall, which is on the Phoenix Indian School property. And there was a big celebration. It was wonderful to be able to celebrate that kind of history. Unfortunately, I noticed in talking to some of the people there that the oldest building remaining on the property, the dining hall, is still in a condition where it is unsafe to go in there and visit and experience it as the oldest building on the Indian School property. So I would encourage at this late date, if at all possible, whether it's through historic preservation funds or parks, whatever it might be, to try to put some money forward to bring the dining hall back to a condition where people can tour it and experience it. It is now, it's about the same age as our state capitol down on 17th Avenue in Washington. So I know it's a late date. The subcommittees have done a tremendous amount of work, but if there's a way to carve out some additional money to bring the oldest building on the Indian School property back to a condition where people can tour it, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ann Baumspark, followed by R.J. Shannon. Ann, could you hear us? It appears Ann is not on the line. Our next speaker is R.J. Shannon, followed by Dan Benton. R.J., could you hear us?
Yes, good morning. My name is R.J. Shannon, and I'm a board member for the Southwest Center. And I'm honored that the city has entrusted our organization with the responsibility of managing its property, the Parsons Center for Health and Wellness. Our proposal for the GO bond is to expand within the building to increase integrated HIV services that include testing, prevention, case management, mental health, and many other supportive services that community members require to live full, healthy, robust lives. Now, this request will allow the center to maximize space utilization within the existing footprint of the building. And this capital investment does not incur any ongoing operational or maintenance expenses, all of which would continue to be paid for by the tenants. Since 1997, I've dedicated my career and now retirement years to increasing access to health care for those living with and at risk for HIV. And I can assure you that all the organizations housed at the Parsons Center are working to keep up with the ever-growing challenges that members face, offering services spanning across age groups, ethnic and gender identities, and economic stability or lack thereof. So in addition, as we all know, COVID-19 exposed inequities in healthcare, lack of safe spaces for our communities most vulnerable, while reinforcing the importance of offering quality mental health care as we seek to better understand how the effects of isolation, illness, the shuttering of services, housing instability, and in some cases, the loss of loved ones, All of this needs to be addressed in a culturally responsive way. The Parsons Center for Health and Wellness is uniquely qualified to offer those services and resources. So as the only proposal in front of the executive committee that deals directly with increasing access to life-enhancing and life-saving healthcare services, I ask for your support to include this expansion in the final recommendation to the City Council. And I thank you most sincerely for listening.
Our next speaker is Dan Benton, followed by Carol Poor. Dan, are you on the line?
Yes, good morning. Thank you, members of the Executive Committee and the City, for all your hard work and commitment to this finding a solution and finding out how to allocate all these funds. I've heard a lot of talk about equity over the past several weeks, and I live in Levine, and it seems as it would appear that after the recession several years back, Levine kind of got left behind. Most of the city already had its improvements; they had what they needed, and there's a couple areas of the city, not just Levine, but Estrella as well, have just been kind of like kind of like a distant afterthought. Now it's like when funding comes around for something, maybe it'll get done, or most likely it'll get kicked down the road. The Levine Area Conveyance Channel is a hot spot for homelessness and fentanyl use in the city. There's been assaults. There's people jumping out of the bushes at people. There's people sitting on laying in the bus stops, and on the news and interviews saying that they like gathering there because they feel comfortable to do their drugs there. The conveyance channel needs improvements desperately. This not only affects the quality of life and the morale of the community, but it also affects potential development and whether or not people want to relocate their businesses here, especially along the South Mountain Tech corridor. We need the conveyance channel lit up. We need lighting. We need improvements, because where there's light, you will get a lot less of the negative element that's there. We need to house the homeless and then address their needs, because without housing, they cannot adhere to any plan. We need to address it. We need to start with at least making the improvements to kind of make the community safe. It's the backbone of Levine. That said, I want it to be based on equity. I don't know how funding for the Hans Park improvements and how funding a hill in the north part of the park and parking lot improvements is an equitable funding model compared to what we're facing out here. Thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate all your work.
Our next virtual speaker is Carol Poor, followed by Eric Ryden. Carol, are you on the line? Carol's not on the line. Our next virtual speaker is Eric Ryden, followed by Jessica Leach on the upper chamber. Eric, are you on the line?
I'm here. Greetings. Thank you for having me, Madam Chair and committee. I'm speaking on behalf of Preserve Phoenix, a local advocacy for historic preservation. In 2011, the Historic Preservation Office published Mid-Century Marvels, a comprehensive analysis of the city's mid-century architecture and its influence on the national and global level. The authors observed and claimed that our unique desert laboratory produced an architecture of optimism. Dozens of those 86 top marvels that embodied that identity have been lost in the past decade. With a fully funded preservation GEO bond money, Preserve Phoenix can develop proactive strategies to adjust the discussions at a public and private level to curb further losses. The Phoenix Preservation is hoping to promote preservation as a science and promote the use of preservationists on development teams early on to develop strategies early on from losing any more important buildings that identify Phoenix. We're hoping that we can work with Helena and the other members of the City Preservation Office to I apologize. That's all we have. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jessica Leach in the upper chamber, followed by Kirk Baxter.
Good morning, afternoon. I'm not sure where it is right now. It's a little dark in the room. My name is Jessica Leach. I'm the Executive Director for the Southwest Center for HIV and AIDS. The Southwest Center holds the operating lease for the Parsons Building, which was created to bring together LGBTQ agencies in one house. We've talked a lot about the need for healthcare in our community. What we haven't talked about is the fact that the Parsons Building offers services to individuals impacted by homelessness, mental health, physical health, and case management, helping to reduce overall the impact of homelessness across the entire city. The additional funding, I have to tell you, that clock clicking down, by the way, is so terrorizing, isn't it? The additional funding will allow us to build 2 stories, one in our big box, which is in a space that we use for events, and one over our lobby. It will also allow us to build out our sub-level to provide group and behavioral health services. This is a shovel-ready project. It has no impact to the general fund. There are no costs beyond the capital costs. So if we are provided funding, we can get going immediately. Obviously, we'll have to deal with supply chain issues, but we've already identified our contractor, and we have the plans in place to get this going. And I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them in the 50 seconds left. Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Kirk Baxter, followed by Cindy Gahn.
Hello, thank you, Madam Chair, committee, and everybody who's chairing any of the subcommittees. I served on a committee years ago, and I know there's work that goes into it, so thank you all. So first, let me just as an introduction, I am the founder of Southwest Center, formerly Phoenix Body Positive. We started in 1990, and one of the things we're proudest about is that during that period of time, everybody on the board, everybody that served in the initial staff were all people who were diagnosed, and we were there together to fight for each other's survival. I will tell you that swiftly, the demographics changed, and every aspect of our community, the greater Phoenix community, came in and indeed were services. Families, children, every group that is part of our city now still continues on as clients in our facility. So one of the things we did is we initially announced a commitment, an absolute commitment, that we would not duplicate services. And to this day, the organization really is a beacon when it comes to collaboration. Collaboration is essential. And perhaps one of the most exciting developments was indeed in 2013, the opening of the Parsons Center for Health and Wellness. And when that did happen, we were then also able to honor the spirit of the first bond funding that we had, which was twofold. It was to develop an HIV center of excellence, but also to provide a meeting place for the LGBT community to come together. That did indeed happen. And so what's happened from that point forward is we've been able to, with organizations right in the building, people coming in for any service, being able to cross a hallway or a sky bridge and get what they need from us and all the other providers in the building. But it's always been about equity, and equity has been said a lot today, but equity in health services which continue, and I will tell you that people indeed now can live and thrive with HIV and then full-blown AIDS if they have access to cutting-edge services. And with access to those services, it's a whole new day. And before I run out of time, I do want to say a quick shout-out. The very first elected official that ever stepped forward in the 1980s was Mary Rose Wilcox, then City of Phoenix council member. So, but I will say in closing, there is no doubt in the fastest-growing city in the nation, our client load, our people coming through for prevention and every other service that you heard continues to grow as well. Our job now is to keep pace with that. We had a great gift in the funding for that building and the capital campaign that came forward with the city. And so from the community for the city. And so all that said, again, it ultimately comes back to an emphasis on equity and us being able to continue to do the work we do and stay current with everything that happens. And ultimately, also having been a leader in the city, adopting the Fast Track Cities initiative to stop HIV and AIDS in its tracks with a goal of having prevention slow down and then stop by 2030. So we can do that, but we need the space to do it, and we need to get people in and serve. So thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Cindy Gahn, followed by Peter Lemniansky.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the Executive Committee. My name is Cindy Gahn, and I serve as Senior Director of Phoenix Community Alliance. I speak on behalf of our nearly 300 members and Board of Directors, and we come together with a united voice to create a stronger downtown for a greater Phoenix. As related to the Neighborhoods and City Services Subcommittee, we are requesting the full funding of the $5 million for historic preservation projects, including demonstration project grants, exterior rehabilitation grants, protection of downtown warehouses and threatened buildings, and the rehabilitation of historic properties owned by the City of Phoenix. Our stock of historic buildings is being depleted at an alarming rate. We can't build new historic buildings. Andy Abkarian, who spoke before me virtually, made some fantastic points about why we should fund this. In addition to this, got to turn my page. As related to the Housing and Human Services and Homelessness Subcommittee, we recommend the projects and we ask for full funding for all projects that were brought forward, totaling $106 million. We ask for your consideration of projects focused on acquisition and renovation of property for non-congregate shelter, for innovation of affordable housing and affordable housing gap funding. The needs are ever increasing, as expressed by Rachel Milne. The numbers aren't going down for our population experiencing homelessness. They're expected to go up. We respectfully request that these funding amounts for these initiatives and projects we request those that they're funded fully, and we thank you all for your service for this very important work that you're doing.
Our next speaker is Peter Lemniansky, followed by Brenda Thompson.
Good morning. Is it still morning? I'm not sure if it's still morning. I think it is. Good morning, Chairwoman Harper and members of the Executive Committee. This is not a comment, but instead a 2.5-minute proposal. My name is Pete Lumiansky. I'm a retired Navy captain and have resided in Phoenix for 32 years. During most of that time, I have been associated with the nuclear-powered fast attack submarine named after the city, the USS Phoenix, SSN 702. For the past 25 years, I've been leading an effort to salvage parts of the now decommissioned submarine and place them in a downtown city park as the centerpiece of a Cold War monument, in tribute to all those military veterans and defense industry workers who helped us prevail in the tense and perilous 45-year Cold War from 1946 to 1991. The major theme of our proposed monument is learn, honor, and remember, and it's an effort to preserve an important, meaningful segment of our history. Over the past 25 years of our negotiations and efforts, we have received from the Navy 65 tons of salvage parts from the USS Phoenix, placed the parts in temporary storage at the National Guard's Papago base, received permission from the city to site our monument in Steele Indian School Park, adjacent to the VA hospital and the Arizona Veteran Home, designed a beautiful Cold War monument, and received the city's approval. And we've raised over $100,000 towards a goal of $3.8 million to start the monument's construction. We feel confident this museum monument will become a real point of pride for Phoenix, the Valley, and the state of Arizona. The time allotted today is insufficient to describe the monument fully and persuasively, but I have provided each of you a brochure and a handout, and Chair Harper with a package of information which will allow you to evaluate the project in more detail. The monument has as its goal to be beautiful, educational, and a true enhancement to Steele Indian School Park. We have made a previous appeal to the Go Bonds Park Subcommittee, but were unable to present our project to the Arts and Economic Development and Education Subcommittees. We feel, however, that our project is compelling and competitive in all three categories, and we urge you to consider our project for priority funding, sourced in part from each of the three areas. Thanks to all of you for volunteering your time and talents to this important city initiative. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Brenda Thompson, followed by Dan Clockey.
Hi, I'm Brenda Thompson. Good morning, and can I say it is so nice to see your actual live faces in person. It feels pretty good. I'm the Executive Director of Arizona Humanities, which is located in the historic Ellis Shackelford House on the corner of Hance Park. I'm also the President of the Carver Museum, which is on the National Register of Historic Places and is also a state historic landmark. In February, I was appointed by the mayor to serve on the Historic Preservation Commission, and I also serve on the Library Advisory Board. So when I put my head on my pillow at night, there might as well be a Phoenix logo on my pillow because it's what I think about taking care of the public, the people that live here, not just in Phoenix, but also across the entire state. I'm respectfully requesting that the Executive Committee fully fund the $5 million for the historic preservation and historic preservation projects. It's only 1% of the total $500 million, but I can tell you that I have personally witnessed that the impact is huge. The Ellis Shackelford House alone, once renovated, has had thousands of people come to hundreds of programs. It is a working treasure. It is not a building that you pass through and point. There are meetings, people learning about water, history, culture, immigration, poetry, ranching, farming. And since the pandemic, we're live streaming, and our programs are being viewed nationwide, not just in Arizona. The second thing that I would mention is the George Washington Carver Museum and Cultural Center. It's on the National Historic Register not just because of its architectural significance, but because of its history. For those unfamiliar with it, it is where the Phoenix Union Colored High School was built in 1926. It's not the part of the history that we're proud of, it's the part of the history that we're trying to make good for now and have equity for. You can't build a school on a landfill in a red line part of town and call that a good thing. But what is good is what's come of it and what continues to come of it, because the alumni purchased the building in 1996, and it has been a community resource ever since. The protection, restoration, renovation, repurposing of historic buildings like that, if there's a final thought, it's about more than architecture. It's about recognizing and respecting the people, the communities, the stories of the people that live there and still live there. We lost 3 Carver alums last month. And I've met some that are 102 years old, including, by the way, Calvin Good, whom this building is named for and who sat on the city council for 22 years. So please fully fund this important work which benefits all the people of Arizona. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Dan Clockey, followed by Joe Moreno.
Chair Harper, members of the Executive Committee, my name is Dan Clockey, and I serve as the chair of the Historic Preservation Commission, as well as being a member on the Neighborhood and City Services Subcommittee. I'm here, as you've heard several times already, to request the full funding of $5 million. We did some hard work for you. It came in at 6.5. We cut our 27.2% before it got to you, so we made it a little bit easier for you all. And so we would request that full $5 million. As has also been mentioned, is historic preservation dollars tend to leverage up a lot of other dollars, about 3 to 1. So this bond fund of $5 million could conceivably leverage up another $15 million of private sector funding. And I think that's important because typically what happens is when these buildings are rehabilitated, their valuation goes up and their tax bill goes up. And so in fact, we are paying for the bond as we go, which I think is a really important part of this. Also important is that there are no operating funds that come from these projects, and so you don't have to worry about them once you say yes to them during this vote. And then finally, 6 of 8 council districts had historic preservation projects in the last bond. And what I would also say is that multiple sort of citywide type projects served everyone. So in this bond that we're requesting, there's funds for the Orpheum Theater and for Heritage Square Park, both of which serve hundreds of thousands of Phoenicians when we're not in COVID, every single year. And so this is truly a citywide request. $5 million, let's face it, is a rounding error in this bond request. So I would ask that you'd sort of round it in versus rounding it out. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Joe Moreno, followed by Ashley Hodder.
Good morning. My name is Joe Moreno. I'm an engineer paramedic with the Phoenix Fire Department. I'm here today representing the members of United Phoenix Firefighters, Local 493. Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members, for your time. I'm here to speak today in support of the Public Safety Subcommittee recommendations. I want to thank the Public Safety Subcommittee for considering the needs of the fire department and prioritizing these desperately needed projects. Our members continue to see increases every year for calls for service and have been provided very minimal amount of additional resources to provide the citizens and our visitors to our city exceptional customer service that they expect from the fire department. Our response times for these calls have increased to almost double the national standard. This negatively impacts our service we provide to the community. We ask that the bond committee support the full recommendation from the Public Safety Subcommittee. Our members desperately need these additional resources to continue to provide the exceptional customer service that our community expects. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your service to this committee.
Our next speaker is Ashley Hodder, followed by Phoenix.gov.
Hello, thank you. My name is Ashley Harder. I am the Executive Director for Preserve Phoenix. Preserve Phoenix is the city's only nonprofit organization that's advocating for the city's historic and cultural assets. So as a representative of Phoenicians that are interested in Phoenix's great history, I'm asking the Executive Committee to fully fund the $5 million of the bond funds that make up only 1% of the total bond program. Historic preservation funding is critical to the preservation of citywide historical and community assets, and funding historic preservation cannot wait. Our inventory is dwindling in the city, and these funds are absolutely critical to seeing more demise of some of our really wonderful assets and the potential that they bring when preserved. It has been determined, and it was shared by our Historic Preservation Commission Chair, Diana Clockey. There are some great economic benefits to preservation. It's been determined that Phoenix funding HP grants leverage almost 3 times that of the amount of private sector spending. Investment in HP grant programs raises the values of private buildings that result in more property taxes back to the city. And importantly, to City Manager Barton's ethos of how to manage and look at some of these funds, historic preservation does not create overhead or additional operating costs to the city, but instead provides a lot of impact and increased investment. Phoenix has a great history, but it also has an unfortunate history of losing its historic places and the sense of pride that exists when preserved. So I thank you for this opportunity to ask that you fully fund the $5 million, which is 1% of the total bond program, and preserve our shared history here in Phoenix. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Phoenix.gov, followed by Jasmine Russell.
Hello, I'm Kieran Goff, Director of the Applied Health Policy Institute at the University of Arizona. As you hear from each committee, I encourage you to think about how the allocation of the funds among the different subject areas demonstrates our priorities. The committees that we heard from today had to make some tough decisions, but sustainability, which you'll hear from next week, was allocated the least of any of the subcommittees in a city with huge sustainability challenges.
I want to thank the Sustainability Committee for listening to input from myself and others and adding heat mitigation into their recommendations. But ultimately, the committee had to cut the budget of every item by 40% to stay within the allocated amount. And so I'm speaking to you to urge you to fund heat mitigation in particular at the full original amount of $11 million that was originally put forward. The subcommittee indicated that this is the true amount that cannot reasonably be deferred, and that the amount they were allocated is not sufficient to meet pressing needs. I have spent a great deal of time, myself and my colleagues at the Institute, reading literature about heat mitigation. So I'll share with you a little bit of context that I also shared with the subcommittee. Trees are a big part of the heat mitigation package, and in 2010, as a city, we made a promise in the Tree and Shade Master Plan to reach a 25% tree canopy by 2030. That was 12 years ago, and it was not funded, and we are never going to reach that goal, but this bond is a real opportunity to invest at a level where we start to see meaningful benefits. To put that into perspective, recently, some of us are very excited about our Cool Corridors program, which funds about 1,800 trees per year. If the heat mitigation item was fully funded to its original amount and say 80% went to trees, that would be more than 18,000 trees worth of funding. And we have an expert who is in charge of the new heat mitigation office, ready to go with this project, and it's a real high value item. So as you hear from the rest of the committees next week, I encourage you to prioritize that. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Jasmine Russell, followed by Ryan Boyd.
Hello, my name is Jasmine Barkley Russell. I'm a lifelong Phoenix resident, a third-generation Arizonan, and I have a master's in sustainability from Arizona State University. I'm also a teacher and an active community member. I understand we will hear from the Sustainability Committee next week, but I'd like to give my comments today on the sustainability allocation. I'm here now because I want to see a larger investment in sustainability, and in particular in heat mitigation. In a city with so many sustainability challenges, I strongly believe we need to reflect to voters that this is a priority. The good news is that sustainability is not just an abstract and boring responsibility, because when we plant trees, the impact is actually immediate. It makes our city more livable today. The shade is up to 15 degrees cooler than the sun. That allows kids to play outside and elderly people to walk down the street. You can't always put your finger on why a neighborhood is appealing, but if you look closely at any desirable street, you will see trees. This type of infrastructure adds character, just like a mural, and it's part of what makes a community joyful. It is something that all of our communities deserve to have. It also does not take a lot of money to start seeing tangible improvements. For example, the heat mitigation, for heat mitigation, the difference between the original amount put forth and the reduced amount is only about $4 million, which is less than 1% of the bond. With that money, we could plant enough trees to shade roughly 40 miles of walking paths based on numbers used in a Nature Conservancy study. I don't think our community members should have to move elsewhere in order to experience a walkable, livable city. I don't want to see my students and their family members in Maryvale be unable to go outside due to extreme and unmitigated heat. I want to see investment now that will ensure the livability of our communities today and moving forward into the future. Thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Good morning, I guess, if I may proceed. Madam Chair, members of the Executive Committee, my name is Ryan Boyd, for the record, with the Urban Phoenix Project. So downtown Phoenix person and happy member of Mr. Martin's subcommittee. I'm here for multiple reasons. Urban Phoenix Project believes in a wide variety of the investments that have been proposed here today and that we'll hear about next week as well. Chief among those is that we believe that we're in a housing crisis and that there needs to be investments made in affordable housing. Chief among those in right-of-way improvements, partially through the streets side of house, partially through others. I wanted to really just highlight, though, on that streets and storm drainage recommendation that the city is so far behind on its investments due to a variety of things that are out of our control that truly have made this a difficult scenario that we know we're in ER mode. We're triaging and trying to fix things where we can. And it's unfortunate, but there's a fatal crash every other day in the city of Phoenix. And it is such a tragedy that we've been trying to work towards fixing and that we've really prioritized, especially on the work of that subcommittee. With that in mind, we understand, I think, everyone who's been involved, the challenges that you all face and that we faced in the subcommittee process towards making the numbers work. But we want to highlight that these right-of-way improvements, streets, complete streets, making it so that people can walk, drive, bus, by any kind of form of transportation, really are critical not only to the livelihood of Phoenicians, but also just to their plain lives. And we would be devastated, frankly, to have to say that after going through and rejecting additional improvements that we came to the original subcommittee thinking that we could maybe invest for the future and really having to repair the past in that subcommittee. To have that further cut down to half is going to be a very difficult thing for us to message back to our own supporters. So with that, we would urge you, we know you're in a tough scenario, but to really invest in those important right-of-way improvements and to help us save lives on Phoenix's streets. Thank you so much for your time.
Madam Chair, those were all the speakers we have registered today.
This then concludes our public comment period, and thank you, all of you who participated. As a reminder, an important reminder, our task is to evaluate proposed projects representing the city's highest priorities, needs totaling $500 million for City Council consideration. The reports presented today and those that will be presented at the next meeting will be our starting point for formulating our recommendations to the City Council. We will hold off on deliberations until we have heard from all subcommittee members, but I will ask if any of our committee members have additional questions or a request for future meetings before we end the meeting today. Yes.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I'm wondering if it would be possible for, and I'm referencing Mr. Barton's October 12th memo to us regarding his recommended allocations and breakdowns. I'm wondering if we can get another table or some other spreadsheet that shows the original staff recommendation, the changed allocation based on the subcommittee, the percentage reduction on what that recommendation was, and compared to your recommendation on an additional column that shows your recommendation in the amount and the percentage. That would be helpful for me. I don't know if that's a formal request or if it's
Let me
adequate.
ask City Manager Barton.
Yep, that's doable, not a problem.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions? If not, our next meeting is October 24th. We will hear recommendations from the remaining 4 subcommittees. We'll also have additional public comment. Members, hopefully all of you can be here. Please reach out if you have a conflict. And with that, our meeting today is adjourned. Thank you all again.